The celebratory feast in the Great Hall of Mount Hua was a loud, joyous affair. I was toasted as an honored guest, a friend who had fulfilled an ancient promise. But my mind was elsewhere. It was on the quiet, resolute woman who sat beside the elders, her face a mask of calm composure, and on the cold, lonely path she had just chosen for herself. Later that evening, long after the last of the disciples had retired and a deep silence had fallen over the mountain, I found her. She was not in her own quarters, but in the simple, Spartan guest room that had been assigned to me. She stood by the open window, a silhouette against the star-dusted sky, a simple silk robe wrapped around her. The cold mountain air drifted in, carrying the scent of pine and frozen stone. I came to stand behind her, my hands resting on her shoulders. She leaned back against me, the warmth of her a stark contrast to the chill of the night. "The elders are already debating what to call it," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "My uncle is suggesting the art of quiet truths." "He always had a flair for the dramatic," I said, my chin resting lightly on the top of her head. "He's not wrong," she replied. "What you showed us, it wasn't just a new movement. It was a new philosophy. You took an art of misdirection and taught it how to be honest." We stood in a comfortable silence, the kind that exists only between people who have no need to fill the space with noise. The reality of her public declaration had now settled between us, a quiet but immense weight. Isolation in the Frostheart Cavern was a sacred and grueling tradition, a journey into the self that could last for months or even years. "Will you be safe?" I asked, the question feeling inadequate. "I will not be comfortable," she answered, her gaze fixed on the sea of clouds below. "But I will be where I need to be. You have reached a new height, Arthur. I will not stand beside you as a liability or as someone who needs protecting. I will stand beside you as an equal." Her voice was filled with a fierce, crystalline resolve. "You have shown me the mountain. I will now make the climb." There was no arguing with that. It was the same relentless drive that I saw in myself. It was one of the things I loved about her. "Before you go," I said, reaching for the scroll I had prepared. "A gift, or rather, a set of notes." She took it from me, her fingers brushing mine. She unrolled it in the moonlight. My neat, precise handwriting was visible, detailing not the Mount Hua art, but the philosophies Julius had taught me in the tower. "Stillness that hurts. Deny their right to start. Pay now exact change." "I cannot teach you how to master the gray," I said quietly. "It is a part of me, not a technique to be learned. But the principles of control, of quietness, of letting the form guide the power, those are universal. This is the grammar I learned. Perhaps it will help you find your own." Her fingers traced the words on the page. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she carefully rolled the scroll and tucked it into her sleeve. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "This is a greater gift than the art itself." She turned in my arms to face me, the cool silk of her robe a whisper against my skin. "Do not get into too much trouble while I am gone," she said, a plea disguised as a command. "I will try to be boring," I promised. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I doubt you will succeed, but I appreciate the sentiment." She stepped closer, rising on her toes to meet me in a deep, lingering kiss. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. A promise of return, a promise of strength, a promise that the months or years of cold and silence ahead would be worth it. It was a final, quiet moment of warmth before the long winter of her training began. The next morning, the tone was formal and solemn. I stood with the sect elders as Seraphina, now dressed in the simple, unadorned white robes of a disciple entering isolation, walked toward the Frostheart Cavern. It was a dark fissure in the side of the mountain, from which a tangible, soul-deep cold emanated. Her father, Emo Zenith, placed a hand on her shoulder. "The path is your own, daughter. Walk it well." Her uncle, my old master Lee Zenith, simply nodded, his face a mask of profound pride. She bowed to them, then turned to me. There were no more words to say. We had said them all in the quiet of the night. She gave me one last, long look, a look that was both a farewell and a vow, then turned and walked into the freezing darkness without a single glance back. I stood and watched until the light from the entrance no longer touched her. My own goodbyes were shorter. I met with Mo Zenith in his study. "She has found her purpose," he said, his voice heavy with a father's pride and fear. "For that, the Mount Hua sect will always be in your debt. She has the strongest will of anyone I have ever known," I said. "The mountain will not break her." "No," he agreed. "It will forge her." Master Li walked with me to the edge of the training platform. "You have given her a great and terrible gift, Arthur Nightingale," he said. "A reason to surpass her own limits. Be ready for the woman who emerges from that cavern." "I'm counting on it," I said. He clapped a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. "Go well. The mountain will remember you." I gave him a final bow, a student to his master, then turned and walked to the center of the platform alone. The promise was kept. Serafina was on her own journey, and now it was time for mine to continue. I needed to do my own work while she did hers. We were on separate paths, but we were climbing parallel mountains. My thoughts turned north, to the Creighton estate, to Alastair, and more importantly, to his wife Isolde, the seer. I reached for the gray, for the familiar feeling of creasing the page of the world. The cold mountain air of Mount Hua was replaced by a rush of silent, silver-gray energy. Then it snapped back into place. I was standing in the cold, biting wind of the northern continent, the scent of ancient pine and frozen earth in the air. A new road lay before me. The cold northern air hit me like a clean blade, sharp, honest, and unforgiving. Below, the Creighton estate rose out of Luminark's urban sprawl, not like a building, but like a statement. Lines of gleaming glass and hardened steel were woven through with spellwork. You could almost see the thrum of protective wards under the stone, humming a silent song of power. The gardens, carved into the architecture with geometric precision, were impossibly green against the metal. Rachel met me in the garden pavilion. She was in a simple white coat, her dark hair unbound, wearing the specific calm she reserved for moments when the world was on fire. She didn't wait. The instant our eyes met, her composure broke into a radiant smile, and she closed the distance between us in a few quick steps. Her hug was a full-body collision of warmth and relief, pulling me in so tight I could feel the frantic beat of her heart. She buried her face in my coat for a long moment before speaking. "You're finally here," she said, her voice muffled but bright. When she pulled back, her hands stayed on my arms, gripping me as if to make sure I was real. Her eyes, wide and searching, scanned my face. "You look different. Stronger," I offered. "Quieter," she corrected, a soft smile playing on her lips. "The power of a high radiant. It suits you. It settled in you, not just sitting on top." "It had to," I said, my mind flashing back to the mountain. "I just came from Hua." Her expression softened with immediate understanding. "Serafina?" She walked into the Frostheart cavern without looking back. Rachel nodded, pride and worry warring in her eyes. "She will emerge a winter storm," she said, her voice certain. Her hand slid down my arm to capture mine, her fingers lacing through mine in a familiar, possessive way. "Come on. Alastair is waiting." She led me up a winding stone path that cut through the gardens. A stream, engineered to perfection, tossed silver light onto our boots. The air smelled of pine and cold water, with an undercurrent of the estate's advanced filtration system doing its best impression of a natural breeze. Alastair was on the terrace overlooking the labs. Tall and spare, he had a stillness that made you feel he could command the space around him just by standing in it. His gaze swept over me, not judging, but assessing, taking in every change since he'd last seen me. Then his stern features broke into a warm, genuine smile. Instead of a handshake, he clasped my shoulder, his grip firm and grounding. "Arthur," he said, his voice full of warmth, "it's good to have you home." He was the closest thing I had to a father, a man who had taught me more about patience and control than any sparring match ever could. Kathleen emerged behind him, two steaming mugs in hand. Rachel's older sister had the same fine-boned face but carried an air of wry exhaustion that came from running the family's medical empire. She handed me a coffee that smelled like heaven and bumped her shoulder against mine companionably. "You're taller," she stated flatly. "And you're a liar," I replied, taking a sip. "Fine. It's the aura, then," she conceded with a half-smile. "It's heavier. Try not to bend my balcony with it." Isolde, Rachel's mother, stood at the far edge of the terrace, a solitary figure. The city lights caught on the dozen silver charms that adorned her wrist. As the seer, she looked at me not as a person, but as a convergence of unseen forces. Her nod was a precise, calculated acknowledgement. "Your presence alters the atmospheric pressure," she said. "It wasn't an accusation, just data." "Yours does too," I returned. She accepted this with another slight nod and melted back toward the shadows. Rachel gave my hand a slight squeeze, a silent bridge across the chasm of her mother's intensity. Alastor waved us to comfortable seats under a reinforced glass awning. Below, Luminark was a river of quiet light and motion. Sky rails stitched districts together with silent speed, and cargo drones traced neon paths through the sky. "How's Stella?" Kathleen asked, tucked into a chair in a way that defied ergonomics. "Counting down to 15, I said, a warmth spreading through my chest. "She's building machines with far too many blinking lights. All fury, no mana." Rachel's lips formed a small, proud smile. She knew the reports, knew why Stella channeled her energy into engineering. "She's brilliant," she said, her voice soft. "She is," I agreed. We spent the next hour talking about things that felt impossibly normal. Kathleen's new clinic expansion. Rachel's research into emotional resonance and spell stability. Alastor's ridiculous bonsai collection, which he claimed was a stress test for microscale containment arrays. "You'll stay for dinner," Alastor said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I had the kitchen acquire those noodles you pretended not to enjoy last time you were here." "The blasphemy noodles," Kathleen supplied, her expression deadpan. "They're a Class 4 culinary hazard. They are merely spirited," Alastor countered, amused. Rachel's phone chimed once before she killed the notification without a glance, her focus entirely on me. She stood, pulling gently on my hand. "You have a little time before my mother ambushes you for a prophecy," she said. "Walk with me." We went back through the quiet of the gardens. As soon as we were shielded by the trees, she stopped and turned to me, her expression serious. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice low and steady. "Not just for the council meeting. I just needed to see you." "Me too," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. She looked like she was on the verge of saying something more, something important, but chose to let the moment hang between us instead. That silence, that choice, was a sign of trust more intimate than any words. Isolde was waiting at the archway to the old wing, as if she knew we'd be there. "The observatory after dinner," she stated. "There is something on the horizon you need to see." "Is it going to ruin my appetite?" I asked. "That," she said, already turning away, her charms chiming softly. "Depends on your horizon." Rachel exhaled slowly. "That's her version of a warm welcome." "I got that," I said with a smile. When we rejoined the others, Alastor looked at me, his earlier warmth replaced by a deep, discerning empathy. "You look like a man who has spent the last month carrying mountains," he said quietly. "Sit, eat, for a few hours, remember the parts of you that are still human." I sat, and Rachel settled beside me, her shoulder a constant, reassuring pressure against mine. For a little while we all set our weapons down, and let the world be small enough to hold right here on this balcony. We left the estate looking like two complete nobodies, and it felt fantastic. Rachel clipped a small glamour disc behind my ear, then tucked one into her own hair. My reflection in a shop window blurred into a stranger, my eyes shifting to a dull brown. But when I looked at Rachel, She was just Rachel. The magic was a veil for the world, not for us. At our level of power, illusions like this were whispers, not commands. Official Saintess Judy's. Cancelled? She said, pulling a cap low over her eyes with a grin that was perfectly, undeniably hers. You look good as a nobody, I teased. It suits you. So does on a day off you, she shot back, her hand finding mine and lacing our fingers together. Come on. You've never Luminarch before. You get to see it with me. We walked out of the south gate and into the real city. It was loud and alive. Gleaming sky rails crisscrossed overhead, and street drones hummed in their designated lanes. The air was cold and clean, smelling of ozone from the city's power grid. I've been here a dozen times, I admitted, but I've never actually seen any of it. That's because you were always on your way to a meeting, she said, pulling me toward the old market quarter. Today, there's no agenda. The polished steel of the main city gave way to warm brick and the scent of street food. We stopped at a cart that smelled of garlic and rich, savory broth. The owner gave us a conspiratorial wink as he slid 2 steaming bowls across the counter. If this is a crime, I'm pleading guilty, I said after the first bite. The soup was so good it felt like a hug. Don't worry, Rachel laughed, already halfway through her bowl. I'll get you a good lawyer. We ate leaning against a low wall that gently deflected the wind. Nearby, a street performer was pulling shimmering birds of light from a glass orb. A little girl gasped with delight as one of the birds dipped down to tap her finger before dissolving into pink sparks. Rachel watched, her face tipped toward the sun, and I saw a new kind of calm settle deep inside her. You leveled up, I said quietly, leaning closer. Mid-radiant. She nodded, a small, proud smile touching her lips. Last month. It happened right in the garden. No lightning, no drama. Everything just clicked into place. You're stronger than your father now, I said. Feels weird to say it, but yeah. She bumped her shoulder against mine playfully. He knew before I did. Said my morning coffee suddenly tasted more efficient. Leave it to a Creighton to measure a power breakthrough in caffeine. Hey, precision is a love language, she said, her expression softening. He was proud. I'm proud of you, Ratch, I said, my voice softer than I intended. She looked away, but not before I saw the happy blush on her cheeks. She squeezed my hand. Keep talking like that and I might just kiss you in front of all these noodle criminals. Next, we rode a hover tram with seats that molded perfectly to our spines. Rachel took us to the archive spiral, a massive library of 5 glass rings built around an ancient stone core. The first time my dad let me come here alone, I pretended to read economic theory, she confessed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I spent 8 hours reading forbidden romance serials. You? A rebel? I leaned against a pillar, grinning. Tell me more. A girl has to have her secrets, she said, tugging me toward the central stone pillar, its surface covered in ancient, carved runes. Someone had left a tiny paper crane on a ledge. Rachel reached up and gently straightened it. Her touch so tender it was as if the paper could feel it. We spent the afternoon wandering. By the river, she bought roasted chestnuts from a grumpy old vendor, completely winning him over by complimenting the elegant wardwork on his cart. Is there anyone you can't charm? I asked, laughing as she popped a warm chestnut into my mouth. Kindness is free, Arthur, she said, then leaned in closer. And I really respect competent enchanting. In a maker's alley buzzing with the energy of young inventors, she stopped to help a girl whose tiny engine was sputtering. With a few quiet words and a gesture, Rachel showed her how to add a heat sink and retune the power flow. The girl stared, starstruck, before scrambling off to find her tools. You can't turn it off, can you? I teased, wrapping an arm around her waist. Always the saint. Look who's talking, she retorted, poking me in the ribs. You basically adopted an entire continent. We found a service stair that led to a hidden rooftop garden. Planter boxes of winter roses bloomed under a gentle warming light, and the whole of Luminarch spread out before us. As Rachel leaned against the railing, the wind catching in her hair, I moved behind her, wrapping my arms around her. She melted back against me instantly, fitting perfectly. "It's crazy," she said softly. "We have all this, and we never take the time to just look at it. Let's fix that," I murmured into her hair. A slow, simple piano melody drifted up from a busker on the street below. I gently turned her to face me, placing one hand on her waist and taking hers with my other. We barely moved, just swayed together to the music, letting the city's hum surround us. "This is nice," she whispered, resting her forehead against mine. "More than nice," I agreed. The world, with all its wars and worries, fell away completely. There was only the cold air, the soft music, and her. Just us. We spent the rest of the day exploring her memories. The ramen shop she loved as a kid, the bench where she and Kathleen plotted a harmless school rebellion, the arcade where she learned humility after being crushed by a 13-year-old gaming prodigy. We even shared a cone of shaved ice that defied the cold, thanks to a clever charm that kept it from melting. As evening began to settle, we found a small park tucked between two footbridges, lit by a string of glowing lanterns. We sat on a bench, watching the city's quiet moments unfold. Rachel rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for today," she said. "Thank you for kidnapping me," I replied. She tilted her head up to look at me, her face soft in the lantern light. To anyone else, she was a forgettable face, her features softened by the glamour. To me, she was as clear and sharp as the winter air. The magic couldn't hide the exact shade of her eyes or the curve of her smile. It was a veil too thin to hide what was real between us. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said, her voice serious. "Not when I'm here." "I know," I said, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Being with you makes it all feel lighter." We walked back as Luminark lit up for the night, the sky rails glowing like blue veins and the great Creighton Tower pulsing with a slow, steady light. On a bridge overlooking the city, we stopped for one last look. "Ever think about just running away?" I asked. "All the time," she admitted with a smile. "But we can't. We can have this, though. We can steal days like this in between all the rest." We slipped back through the estate's south gate just as the first snowflakes of the year began to fall. The glamour discs went silent. It felt like taking off a coat in an already warm room. A formality, since we hadn't felt the chill of the illusion between us all day. Back in the familiar quiet of the garden pavilion, she stood on her toes and gave me a kiss that was soft and deep and full of the day's easy happiness. It wasn't a firework. It was the warmth of a hearth. She tucked herself under my arm as we walked toward the main house. "Saintus mode. Rebooting," she murmured wryly. "Second hero reporting for duty," I replied. "I have so many meetings tomorrow," she sighed. I stopped, turning to face her. "But tonight," I said, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "You have me." Her eyes lit up, reflecting the golden garden lights. "I do," she said, and her smile was the brightest thing in the entire city. Dinner was a pocket of warmth in a cold world, a temporary truce with the weight of my own reality. We ate Alastair's infamous noodles, which lived up to their hazardous reputation, and for a precious few hours, the world shrank to the size of that terrace. We were just people, laughing as Kathleen expertly stole food from my bowl and Rachel dismantled her father's logic in a debate over magical ethics. It was dangerously easy to pretend this was all there was. But the night had other obligations. As Rachel went to walk with her sister, Alastair caught my eye with a knowing look. I gave him a slight nod. It was time. I had come to the northern continent to consolidate allies and assess the readiness of its forces, but there was a personal pilgrimage I needed to make. One last visit to the Oracle. One last attempt to glean a fragment of certainty from a woman who read the future like a book. I left the comforting glow of the family wing behind. The transition was stark. The air grew colder, the modern architecture giving way to ancient, magic-saturated stone that seemed to drink the sound from the air. The humming of the estate's power core faded. replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a presence. I ascended the lone spiral staircase into the observatory, a dome of what looked like polished living night. Isolde was waiting. She stood in the center of the room, a solitary figure adrift in a sea of cosmic data. The ceiling wasn't glass. It was a perfect, real-time mirror of the heavens, stars, and nebulae drifting slowly across its obsidian expanse. Shimmering charts of impossible constellations floated in the air like ghostly blueprints, their ethereal light catching the silver charms on her wrist. Ancient-looking instruments of brass and crystal stood like silent sentinels at the room's edge. The air itself thrummed, not with the estate's technological power, but with a primal, temporal energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She was not in a room. She was at the heart of a cosmic engine. "Arthur," she said, her voice as calm and distant as the starlight around her. "I knew you would seek me out before you left." "I had to," I replied, stepping into the circle of celestial light. Felt like crossing a threshold into another realm. "You told me there was something on the horizon. I'm here for the details. Whatever you've seen, I need to know." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured to a massive, floating chart near her that depicted a snarl of interwoven golden threads. The fates of thousands, millions, all moving toward a single, dark point of convergence. "This is the coming war," she said. "I can see the movements of armies, the fates of nations, the deaths of heroes yet to fall. I can see the Demon King's strategy as it unfolds, a tapestry of shadow and blood. And my thread?" I asked, searching the complex diagram. "Where do I fit into it?" Isolde finally turned to face me, and her eyes, the legendary Akasha's eyes, were unervingly blank. They held no vision, no path, no future. They held only a reflection of me. "You don't," she said, her voice flat. "Your thread is gone. When I look for you in the tapestry of what is to come, there is nothing. A void. An empty space where a billion futures used to be." The words hit me with a physical force. Disbelief warred with a cold, creeping dread. "That's not possible. Your gift has never failed. It cannot fail." "My gift is not failing," she corrected, her tone clinical, as if describing a fascinating but terrifying paradox. "It is functioning perfectly. It reads from the Akashic records, the source code of causality, the grand narrative of all that was, is, and will be. The records are absolute. But you, Arthur, are no longer bound by their text. You are an anomaly the likes of which this world has never seen." She moved closer, her gaze intense, analytical. "The power you wield, the one you call Grey, it is not a part of the system. It is something other. Something that exists outside of the narrative. When I use Akasha's eyes to look at your path, I see a rip in the page of the universe. I see a storm of pure static where your story should be. It is a power that doesn't just operate within fate. It fundamentally surpasses it. It is the power to write, not to be written." The scale of what she was saying was staggering. I wasn't just a wild card. I was a different game entirely. All my life, I had fought against a destiny that seemed predetermined. Now, I was adrift in a sea of infinite possibility, with no map, no stars, no shore. It was a terrifying form of freedom. "So you can't help me?" I stated, the words tasting like ash. My most reliable source of strategic intelligence was gone. "I cannot give you a prophecy," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "But I can give you an observation. For your entire life, your fate has been a raging river, every current charted. Now you are the river itself. Everything you have accomplished these past months, every impossible victory, you achieved them while operating completely blind to fate. You are already doing what was thought to be impossible." She met my gaze, and the detached seer was gone, replaced by a woman making the ultimate gamble. "I have relied on certainty my entire existence, Arthur. Now, I am choosing to put my faith in the one absolute uncertainty this world has ever known. I am choosing to believe in you. Trust your instincts. They have proven more reliable than destiny itself." A man whose future cannot be read by Akasha is the only man who can truly rewrite it. Her faith was a heavier burden than any prophecy. We stood in the profound silence of the observatory, the weight of her words settling over me. She had given me her professional counsel. It was time to return the favor. "Thank you, Isolde," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Now I have some advice for you." She raised a single questioning eyebrow. "Go be a mother to your daughter," I stated plainly. The effect was jarring. The ancient, all-seeing oracle shattered, and a broken woman stood in her place. The stoic mask crumbled, revealing a well of pain so deep it seemed to have no bottom. "I have forfeited that right," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I do not deserve her." "I agree," I said, my voice unrelenting. "But she deserves a mother who tries." "You don't understand what I did to her," she choked out, wrapping her arms around herself. "The visions, when they first came, I saw the end. Not just war, but utter annihilation. I saw Earth cracked open, swallowed by legions of demons. I saw everyone I knew, everyone I loved, burning. I saw Rachel. I saw her die 1,000 different ways, each more horrific than the last. Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked. The trauma, it broke me. I was living in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Every time I looked at my own child, I saw her corpse. I thought if I was cruel, if I pushed her away, if I forged her in ice and fear, she would be hard enough to survive the hell I saw coming. I became a monster to fight the monsters in my head." She shook her head, a gesture of profound self-loathing. "I destroyed her childhood because I was too weak to bear my own visions." "You did?" I affirmed, my tone softening slightly. "You can never undo that. You can't erase the scars you left on her heart. They are a part of her now, a part of your shared history. That truth is as fixed as any prophecy." She flinched, expecting more condemnation. "But the past is the only thing that's truly written, Isolde," I continued, walking toward her. "You taught me that. You can't change what you did, but you can stop letting it define what you will do. You can choose to stop being the monster. You can choose to try and build something new on the ruins of what you broke." I stopped a few feet from her. "You can't demand her love or her forgiveness, but you can start acting like someone who might, one day, be worthy of it." I held her gaze for a final moment, letting the words settle in the space between us. Then, I turned my back on the seer and her cosmic engine and walked out of the observatory. Behind me, Isolde Creighton remained motionless, a lone figure left with nothing but the silent, wheeling stars and the impossible weight of a choice that no prophecy could make for her. Walking away from the observatory felt like breaking the surface of a deep, cold lake and into the sun. The profound, engineered silence of the old wing dissolved with every step, replaced by the faint, familiar hum of the estate's modern power core. The sterile, chilled air warmed. The sound-dampening stone underfoot gave way to plush carpets, and the cosmic starlight was replaced by the soft, golden glow of residential sconces. The quiet back there wasn't an absence of noise. It was a powerful spell designed to insulate the seer from the rest of the world. Isolde had taken a great weight from me and replaced it with another. The crushing burden of a predetermined fate was gone, but in its place was the terrifying, absolute freedom of a man who had to write his own. And yet I felt lighter, clearer. The path ahead was no less dangerous, but for the first time, it felt entirely my own. I found Rachel in the sitting area just outside my assigned rooms, curled up on a sofa, pretending to read a book. She shot to her feet the moment she saw me, her anxiety a tangible aura in the quiet hallway. "Arthur, you're done. How was it?" Her hands found the front of my jacket, gripping it tightly. "Was she okay?" "She can be intense. I don't know why you still humor her." I gently took her hands in mine. Her anxiety was different from what I expected. It wasn't fear of a prophecy. Luna, the Qilin, had already told her I was a blank page to fate. It was the specific, personal worry of someone who loves a person who defies all rules and knows her mother is obsessed with them. "Hey," I said softly, kissing her forehead. It went well, Ratch. It was a good talk. A good talk. She looked skeptical. I know you feel like you owe her for what happened after that accident, with the inscription. But you don't have to let her put you under a microscope every time you visit. Her words painted the picture of her reality. She didn't know the truth. She didn't know that her mother's coldness was born from traumatic visions, that the abuse she endured was the twisted result of a seer's terror. The truth I now carried felt heavy in my chest, but it was not my truth to give. It had to come from Isolde, if it ever came at all. It wasn't like that, I assured her. It was clarifying. Now, I'm done with cryptic conversations for the night. I tugged her hand, leading her into the private sitting room of my suite. With a lazy gesture, I lit the embers in the hearth, coaxing them into a warm, crackling fire. The city of Luminark glittered through the vast window. Rachel sighed, the last of her tension melting away as she leaned against me, watching the flames. It's good to have you here, she murmured into my shoulder. Where I can see you. I chuckled, a real easy laugh. That's a definite improvement on your old methods. She pulled back slightly, a confused frown on her face. What old methods? Oh, come on, I teased, a wide grin spreading across my face. Are you forgetting your teenage years already? The cuffs. I started, thoroughly enjoying myself. The ones you invented, that just so happened to be a perfect fit for me? You were reckless. You needed supervision, she sputtered. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And the cage, Rachel? The one you were designing in your schematics with the soundproofed walls and the meal slot. An architectural study? She groaned and covered her burning face with her hands. Her shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Oh my gods, I can't believe that happened, she mumbled into her palm. You were a genuine menace, I said as I squeezed her nose, making her face scrunch up. You're calling me a menace? Her head snapped up, the embarrassment on her face replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated challenge. You who collects fiancés like they're trading cards. You want to talk about being a menace? It was my turn to blink. I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, really? She took a step forward, poking a finger into my chest. Let's review. In Mythos Academy, you ended up seducing 3 different princesses. 3, Arthur. And, as if that wasn't enough, you also made the daughter of a marquis fall for you at the same time. She was warming up now, her gestures becoming more animated. And my personal favorite. You rescued a woman from a cult while also making sure to do your best to charm her, so that her only wish would be to serve you. And don't even get me started on Luna. How do you even get engaged to a literal, honest-to-God's Qilin? What did you do? Compliment her divine scales. She threw her hands up in exasperation. And that's just the official list. That doesn't even count the ones we had to fend off. Do you have any idea how much strategic coordination it took between me, Cecilia, Serafina, and Rose just to keep others from trying to stake their own claims? It was a full-time job. So don't you dare talk to me about a cage I designed when I was 15. I stared at her, completely disarmed. She stood there, chest heaving slightly from her rant, her eyes blazing with a fire that was equal parts righteous indignation and deep affection. A slow grin spread across my face. All right, I said, raising my hands in surrender. You win. Her triumphant expression was priceless, but it quickly softened as I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Before she could react, I slid one arm under her back and the other beneath her knees, lifting her effortlessly into my arms. Hey! She yelped, a startled laugh escaping her as she instinctively wrapped her arms around my neck. The winner gets carried to bed, I declared, turning from the sitting room toward the adjoining bedroom. We passed the doorway where one of the Creighton house guards stood sentinel. The guard, a stern-looking woman in a pristine uniform, simply gave a crisp, professional nod, her expression not changing in the slightest as I walked past carrying her laughing mistress. You are ridiculous, Rachel murmured, tucking her face into my neck as the bedroom door swung shut behind us. I know, I said, my voice soft as I carried her into the darkness. But I'm your ridiculous. The observatory was a tomb of silent, wheeling light. After Arthur had gone, Isolde remained motionless, a statue at the heart of her own cosmic engine. The weight of his final words did not settle upon her. They pierced her, shattering a dam of denial that had stood for nearly 2 decades. Go be a mother to your daughter. It was a simple command, yet it struck her as more impossible than halting the stars in their courses. For years, she had worn her coldness as armor, her cruelty as a shield, not just against the world, but against the terrified, broken woman she had become after her first true vision. She looked up at the perfect, cold representation of the heavens. It offered no comfort, no answers. It was a machine just like her gift. It showed what was, what would be, and cared for none of it. But Arthur was different. He was a blind spot in creation, a man untethered from the grand, terrible narrative of Akasha. His existence was a defiant miracle, and he had used that defiance not to demand a prophecy, but to demand that she face the wreckage of her own life. A shudder racked her body. It started in her soul and worked its way out, a violent tremor of self-loathing and a terror so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. The thought of walking out of this sanctum, of finding Rachel, of trying to form the words of apology. It was a precipice. It would be so much easier to stay here, to let the silence reclaim her, to let the years pass as they always had. It would be safer. You can't demand her love or her forgiveness, but you can start acting like someone who might one day be worthy of it. The memory of his voice was a steadying hand on her back, pushing her toward the edge. He was right. The past was immutable. Her sins were carved into the memory of this house, into the very heart of her child. But the future, for the first time she considered that her own future, the one between her and her family, might also be a blank page. Her first step was stiff, the movement of a joint long and used. She walked out of the observatory, leaving the silent cosmos behind. The transition from the old wing to the main residential area was a journey through time and temperature. The air, once sterile and chilled to preserve the delicate instruments of her craft, gradually warmed, carrying the faint, pleasant scents of polished wood and Alastair's prized night-blooming jasmine. The oppressive, warded silence designed to keep the universe out gave way to the soft, ambient hum of a living home. Every step took her further from the seer and closer to the woman she had failed to be. She found Rachel not in her room, but in the family's private library on the 3rd floor. It was a warm, inviting space, filled with thousands of books, both physical and digital. A low fire crackled in the hearth, casting a gentle, flickering light on the comfortable sofas and reading chairs. Rachel was curled in one of them, a thick blanket over her legs, a steaming mug of tea on the table beside her. She wasn't reading. She was staring into the flames, her expression thoughtful and distant, likely replaying the easy, happy moments she had shared with Arthur. Isolde paused at the threshold, her courage faltering. Rachel looked so peaceful. To approach her now felt like an act of violence, a deliberate shattering of that fragile calm. The old, familiar justifications began to whisper in her mind. Leave her be. You will only cause more pain. She is better off without you. She forced them down, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She took a breath and stepped into the room. The subtle shift in the air was enough. Rachel's head snapped up, and the moment she saw her mother, the peace in her expression vanished, replaced by a familiar, weary defensiveness. Her posture stiffened. "Mother," she said, her voice polite, but with an edge of steel. "I thought you'd be in the observatory for the rest of the night." Isolde's throat was dry. Her carefully rehearsed words abandoned her. She stood there, a few yards from the sofa, feeling like a stranger. "I needed to speak with you, Rachel." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. "If this is about Arthur, he already told me your talk went well. You don't need to give me a secondary briefing." "It is not about Arthur," Isolde said, her voice barely a whisper. She took another hesitant step forward. "It is about us." The defensive shield around Rachel solidified. "There is no us, Mother. There is you and there is me. We exist in the same house. That's the extent of it. The words were a physical blow, but Isolde knew she deserved them. She deserved 1,000 more just like them. Please, she said, the word cracking with a vulnerability she hadn't shown in years. Just listen. That is all I ask. Something in her tone, the raw, unvarnished desperation, must have broken through. Rachel didn't relax, but she didn't tell her to leave. She watched her, her gaze wary and intensely curious, and gave a single curt nod. Isolde took a deep, shuddering breath. This was it, the precipice. You have spent your entire life wondering why, Isolde began, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. Why I was cold, why I was cruel, why the mother you had as a small child seemed to vanish, replaced by what I became. You deserve to know the reason, not as an excuse, but as the truth. She met her daughter's gaze. I can see the future, Rachel. The book slipped from Rachel's numb fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a soft, final thud. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed walls of her world, built on a foundation of a mother's inexplicable coldness, had just been leveled by a single, impossible truth. What? Rachel breathed, the word thin and disbelieving. My gift is more. I am more than a normal Aesir. I see the threads of fate. I can read the Akashic records. Isolde's voice grew heavy with the weight of memory. When you were 5 years old, my gift fully awakened, and the first thing I saw, the first coherent vision I truly experienced, was the end of our world. She didn't just say the words. She let the memory bleed into her expression, her face paling, her eyes losing focus as she looked back into that abyss. I saw it all. I saw the sky turn to fire and the oceans boil. I saw cities of glass and steel like this one reduced to smoking craters and fields of ash. I saw demons, legions of them, swarming over the land, devouring everything. And I saw the people we love. I saw your father, impaled on a black spear, trying to shield your sister. I saw Cathalne, fighting back to back with Alastor until they were overwhelmed. I saw you. Her voice broke. A single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek. I saw you die, Rachel. I saw it 1,000 times. I saw you burn. I saw you torn apart. I saw you fall, fighting and screaming, alone. Over and over, for weeks, that was my reality. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my family being slaughtered. Rachel was pale, her hands gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles were white. She was looking at her mother as if for the first time, the pieces of a painful, nonsensical childhood suddenly, horrifically, clicking into place. The brutal training regimens, the impossibly high standards, the relentless emotional starvation, it was all reframed through the lens of a parent's absolute, mind-shattering terror. The vision broke me, Isolde confessed, her voice thick with shame. I was weak, I was terrified, and I took that terror, all that horror and weakness, and I aimed it at you. I thought, in my madness, I believed that if I could make you hard, if I could make you cold and strong and utterly self-reliant, that you might survive the hell that I had seen. I thought if you didn't love me, you wouldn't mourn me when I was gone. I became a monster because I was too afraid to be a mother. She finally took the last few steps, stopping before the sofa and sinking to her knees on the carpet. She looked up at her daughter, her face stripped bare of all pride, all pretense. That is the reason, she said, her voice shaking but clear. But it is not an excuse. Nothing in this world or any other could ever excuse what I did to you. A stronger woman, a better mother, would have held you closer. She would have treasured every moment. But I was not that woman. I was a coward. I failed you in every conceivable way a mother can fail her child. I hurt you, I broke your trust, and I starved you of the love you deserved. And I am so sorry, Rachel. I am sorry for every cold word, for every moment of fear I caused you, for every night you cried yourself to sleep wondering what you had done to make your mother hate you. It was never you. It was always me. I was broken. She bowed her head, the apology hanging in the air between them, a fragile, terrifying offering. The silence that followed was immense, filled with the ghosts of 20 years of pain. Rachel didn't speak for a long time. She simply stared at the woman kneeling before her, this stranger who wore her mother's face. The anger was still there, a deep, foundational part of her, but it was now joined by a dizzying storm of shock, pity, and a profound, aching sorrow for the little girl she had been and the mother she had never known. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet and hoarse. "All this time, you could have just told me. I was a coward," Isolde repeated, not looking up, "and I was ashamed." Rachel slowly, tentatively, reached out a hand. She didn't touch her mother. She just let it hover in the space between them. "I don't forgive you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I ever can. The things you did, they don't just disappear because there's a reason for them." Isolde finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I know, but—" Rachel's hand drifted down, her fingertips brushing against her mother's shoulder. It was the first time she had initiated contact in over a decade. "I will try to understand. I will give you a chance to be something else." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was a beginning. A tiny, fragile crack in a wall of ice that had stood for a lifetime. For Isolde, it felt like the first ray of dawn after an endless night. An hour later, Isolde stood before the closed doors of Alastair's study. The encounter with Rachel had left her emotionally flayed, but also filled with a sliver of impossible hope. She knew she could not stop there. The deception had not been aimed at Rachel alone. It had been a poison that had seeped into the foundations of her entire family. She knocked. "Enter," Alastair's calm voice called. She stepped inside. Her husband was at his desk, reviewing data on a translucent screen. Kathleen was in an armchair by the fire, a tablet in her lap, looking over clinic expansion proposals. They both looked up, their expressions shifting to surprise at her presence in their shared sanctuary. "Isolde," Alastair said, his brow furrowing with concern. "You look unwell." She hadn't bothered to fix her appearance. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling the last of her strength begin to fade. "There is something I should have told you both a long time ago," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. She told them everything. She told them about her gift, about the apocalyptic vision, and about how that vision had driven her to become the cruel, distant mother Rachel had known. She spared no detail of her own weakness, her own failure. Kathleen's reaction was one of stunned, analytical silence. She lowered her tablet, her sharp mind working furiously, recontextualizing every memory of her mother's strange behavior, her odd pronouncements, and her fractured relationship with Rachel. It was the pragmatist's shock, the processing of a lifetime of flawed data suddenly being corrected by one overwhelming truth. Alastair's reaction was quieter and far more profound. As she spoke, the calm, patient strength in his face slowly crumbled, revealing the deep, deep hurt of a man who realized he had never truly known his own wife. He had lived beside her for decades, loved her, built a life and a family with her, all while she carried a universe of terror and a terrible secret entirely alone. He didn't look angry. He looked heartbroken. When she finished, the silence in the study was as heavy as the one in the observatory had been. It was Alastair who moved first. He rose from his desk, walked over to the small bar in the corner, and poured a small measure of amber liquid into a glass. He walked back and pressed it into her trembling hands. Then, he simply rested his hand on her shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The gesture said everything. "I am still here. We are broken, but I am still here." Kathleen finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "You should have told us," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, tinged with a deep and complicated sorrow for the sister she had watched suffer for years without ever understanding why. "We could have helped you." "I didn't think I could be helped," Isolde whispered, looking at her older daughter, truly seeing her for the first time in years. "And I didn't think I deserved it." No more was said that night. There were too many wounds, too many years of misunderstanding to bridge with a single conversation. But as Isolde stood there, flanked by her husband and her firstborn, she felt something shift. The crushing weight of her solitude, a burden she had carried for 20 years, began to lift. She was not forgiven. Her family was not healed. But for the first time since the fire filled her vision, she was no longer alone in the darkness. She was standing on a new, uncertain ground. It was the starting line, and she knew, with a terrifying and hopeful clarity, that the long, painful work of becoming a family again had only just begun. A month passed. It was a strange, tense, and unervingly domestic month. The world outside our penthouse windows in Avalon hummed along, utterly ignorant of the 2-year clock Alisara had set, a cosmic deadline ticking away in the quiet rooms of our home. We existed in a bubble of borrowed time, each sunrise a small, defiant victory. This morning was a perfect portrait of that contradiction. Sunlight, crisp and golden with the first real bite of autumn, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass, illuminating the controlled chaos of Stella's latest project. Schematics and half-assembled prototypes had colonized the living room floor, a testament to a mind that never stopped building. Stella, now a whirlwind of 13 years and formidable intellect, was on her stomach, arguing passionately with Rachel over the optimal gear ratios for a kinetic driver. But if you increase the torque, the energy loss from friction compounds exponentially after the third rotation, Stella insisted, her pencil jabbing at a complex diagram. Rachel, cross-legged on the floor beside her in one of my old, ridiculously oversized hoodies, just smiled, her eyes bright with amusement and pride. Only if you're using a standard alloy. What if we introduce a self-lubricating enchantment to the housing? Luna was curled in a plush armchair, a book of ancient poetry open in her lap, her serene, golden presence a perfect anchor to the room's vibrant energy. From the kitchen, the rich scent of Reka's coffee and the quiet, precise sounds of her preparing breakfast provided the steady rhythm to our morning. It was a picture of peace, and it was the most stressful thing in the world. Every quiet moment felt like a second stolen from the training we desperately needed. Every laugh from Stella was a fresh reminder of the stakes. I stood by the window, a lukewarm mug of coffee in my hands, watching the city breathe below. I wasn't just appreciating the quiet. I was mapping it, memorizing it, holding it in my mind as the reason for the violence to come. We had the intel now, trickles of it from Isolde's strained, exhausting visions. We knew the Red Chalice cult was mobilizing, gathering resources, preparing the stage for their master's full ascension. We knew the names of some of her lieutenants. What we didn't have was the strength to face them. Not yet. We were waiting for our final piece to be back on the board. "You're brooding again," Rachel called out, her focus never leaving the schematic. "Your I am contemplating cosmic annihilation face is very dramatic, but it makes the ficus plant nervous. He's rerunning the probability of success based on our current power levels and factoring in a new variable for your distracting levels of charm," Luna murmured, turning a page. "The probability is low, but the charm is off the charts." I was about to offer a retort when my phone chimed. It was a simple, mundane sound, a text notification that felt utterly out of place in the high-stakes silence of our lives. It sat on the polished granite of the kitchen counter, a small black rectangle that had just altered the course of our future. Every sound in the penthouse stopped. Rachel and Stella looked up, Reka's knife stilled over a chopping board. Luna's book closed with a soft, final snap. I walked over and picked it up. The screen was bright in the dim kitchen. It was a message from Serafina. It wasn't a long, emotional announcement. It was 3 words, as precise and sharp as she was. "I'm out. Come." A breath I hadn't realized I was holding left my chest in a long, slow sigh. The wait was over. "She's out," I said to the room. A wave of palpable relief washed through the air. Rachel's face broke into a brilliant, unguarded smile. "Go," she said, her voice firm with an underlying warmth. "We've got Stella. Tell her. Tell her we're all waiting for her." I met her gaze, a silent universe of thanks passing between us. I looked to Luna, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. Be there for her, her eyes said. She'll need you. I let the gray answer. The warmth of the penthouse, the smell of coffee, the sound of my daughter's laughter. It all dissolved as I folded the world like a familiar map. The whiplash was absolute. One moment I was in a sunlit kitchen in Avalon. The next I was standing on the main training platform of Mount Hua. The air so thin and cold it felt like breathing knives. The sun was brighter here. A harsh, unforgiving light against a sky of impossible blue. The platform was empty. The morning katas long since finished. A profound silence hung over the peak, broken only by the lonely cry of the wind whipping through the prayer banners. She was standing at the far edge, a solitary figure in white looking out over a sea of clouds. Her family reunion, the formal report to the sect, all of that was already done. This moment was for her. And for me. I walked toward her, my footsteps silent on the polished black stone. She didn't turn, but I knew she felt my approach. I stopped a few feet behind her, giving her the space. You're late, she said, her voice a low, clear chime that cut through the wind. You're early, I replied. I thought you'd take at least a year. The cavern and I came to an agreement, she said. It ran out of things to teach me. She finally turned, and the breath caught in my throat. The change was staggering. She wore a simple, fresh white robe, and her silver hair, once a river that fell to her waist, was now cut short, just below her jawline. It was a practical, severe style that framed her face, stripping away the last vestiges of the princess she had been and revealing the warrior she had become. But the real change was in her presence. Before, her power had been a sharp, beautiful but brittle thing, like a perfectly formed icicle. Now it was a glacier. It was the quiet, absolute, unmoving weight of a polar ice cap, a power that didn't just freeze but commanded stillness on a fundamental level. The cold emanating from her wasn't an attack. It was a simple, settled fact of her existence. The isolation had scoured away the gifted student, leaving behind the solid, unshakable presence of a master. Her aura was a clean, solid, undeniable, mid-radiant. The new look suits you, I said, my voice softer than I intended. A rare, small smile touched her lips, a flicker of warmth in the winter of her new power. My father was horrified, she admitted. He said I'd dishonored my lineage. My uncle said it was practical. He was right, I said. We stood there, the wind swirling around us, a universe of unspoken things passing between us in the silence. The relief I felt was so profound it was almost painful. She was alive. She was whole. She was more. And then, I closed the distance between us. I didn't know what I was going to do until I was doing it, my arms wrapping around her, pulling her in. She was stiff for a single, shocking heartbeat, her body not remembering how to accept a simple human touch. Then, with a small, sharp exhale, she melted against me. She was so cold. It was a deep, soul-deep chill, a remnant of the cavern that clung to her like a shroud. But underneath it, I could feel the faint, familiar warmth of the woman I knew, the steady, stubborn beat of her heart. I held her tighter, pouring my own warmth into her, trying to chase away the ghosts of the ice. She buried her face in my shoulder, her hands gripping the back of my coat with a desperate strength. I could feel the fine tremors running through her body, the rigid control she maintained at all times finally cracking. She wasn't crying. Serafina didn't cry. But this was the next closest thing. It was the silent, shuddering release of a year spent in absolute, soul-crushing solitude. I was worried. I whispered into her hair, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. I know, she murmured, her voice muffled against my coat. I felt it. Sometimes, it was the only thing that kept me warm. We stood like that for a long time, two quiet figures on a lonely mountaintop, holding each other up against the vast, empty sky. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were clear, but they held a new depth, a new shadow of the things she had seen in the dark. It's done, she said, her composure slotting back into place. But it was a different kind of composure now. Not a shield, but a foundation. I have seen the heart of winter. The lessons are learned. I reached out and tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear, my fingers brushing against her cold skin. Welcome back, Seraphina. She leaned into my touch for a fraction of a second, a small, trusting gesture that spoke volumes. It's good to be back. She looked at me then, her gaze sharp and focused, the new weight of her power settling around her like a mantle. The time for comfort was over. The time for work had begun. Tell me everything, she said, her voice ringing with a new, quiet authority. Tell me how far we have to climb. I met her gaze, my own resolve hardening to match hers. The wait was over. The board was set. I'm ready, she said, and it was the sound of a promise finally being kept. The teleportation nexus deposited Seraphina and me into the low, ambient hum of the Creighton estate. We materialized not into celebration, but into the heavy, charged silence of a command center bracing for impact. The month since her descent into the Frostheart Cavern had been a tight coil of waiting, planning, and wrestling with the sickening realization of our own inadequacy against the coming storm. Seeing her beside me now, radiating the profound, settled cold of a newly minted mid-radiant, was less a relief and more the sound of the final lock clicking into place before a siege. The board was finally set. Alastair met us, his face etched with a gravity that went beyond his usual calm professionalism. His eyes lingered on Seraphina, assessing the glacial weight of her new power with a strategist's precision. Seraphina, he greeted, a nod conveying volumes. Welcome back. Your timing is, as always, precise. The cavern yielded all it could, she replied, her voice the clear, low chime of winter ice. No hint of the ordeal remained on the surface, only the profound depth of the power she now commanded. The conference room is prepared, Alastair stated simply. Everyone is waiting. He led us through corridors that felt different than my last visit. The gleaming surfaces seemed harder, the ambient hum of the estate's power core less a sign of life and more the thrum of a drawn bowstring. Security wards pulsed with a higher intensity, visible even to the naked eye as faint shimmers in the air. This wasn't just a home anymore. It was a bunker preparing for divine wrath. The obsidian conference room was a circle of focused tension. The panoramic window overlooking the meticulously sculpted gardens felt like a cruel joke, a portal to a serene world that no longer truly existed for us. Around the massive table sat the pillars of my world, each bearing the weight of the coming conflict in their own way. Rachel was beside her father, multiple data slates active before her, her usual warmth tempered by a clinical focus. Alice, my mother, stood sentinel near the window, her stillness a palpable force that seemed to subtly reinforce the room's wards. Lucifer leaned against a far wall, arms crossed, radiating a restless energy beneath his calm facade. His twin crowns of light and shadow flickered with impatience. Reka stood behind an empty chair, perfectly composed, her hand resting lightly on its back, a silent guardian. Rose sat beside her, her quiet presence a small, vital counterpoint to the room's grim atmosphere. The single blue rose in the vase before her seemed impossibly vibrant against the stark black table. Luna occupied a space across from them, her golden eyes meeting mine the moment we entered, conveying a universe of shared knowledge and concern. Beside her, Cecilia sat with the unwavering posture of command, the crown princess ready for war, her gaze sharp and assessing as she took in Seraphina's transformation. And at the table's far end, almost swallowed by the high-backed chair, sat Isolde. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished, the silver charms on her wrist utterly still. Her gaze was fixed on the reflective surface of the table, a necessary phantom at this council. Seraphina and I took the last two seats. The circle was complete. Alastair remained standing at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "Thank you all for assembling," he began, his voice devoid of pleasantries. "We convene today to finalize our response to the existential threat posed by Alisara and her organization, the Red Chalice Cult. Seraphina's return brings our core combat strength to its full potential. The situation is critical. Arthur, Please update the council. I leaned forward, the cold obsidian cool beneath my palms. The core facts remain unchanged. Alisara possesses a fragment of divine power, operating at a level far exceeding our current capabilities. She holds Lyra's brother captive. She has established a fanatical cult that grows bolder by the day. And she has given us a 2-year deadline, coinciding with her complete integration of the power she stole. Isolde's work over the past month, however, has provided crucial context. I nodded towards Rachel's mother. Isolde took a shaky breath, her knuckles white where she gripped the arms of her chair. She still didn't meet anyone's eyes, but her voice, when she spoke, was unexpectedly firm. The cult's activities are accelerating, she reported, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere in the table's dark reflection. They are not merely gathering followers. They are systematically targeting sites of power, ley line convergences, ancient shrines, places where the veil between worlds is thin. They are preparing the infrastructure not just for Alisara's ascension, but for something larger, a reshaping. Her voice dropped, becoming barely a whisper. Her focus remains Arthur. Lyra's brother is a tool, a key perhaps to understanding the Great Seven's defenses, or a source of unique energy, but not the primary objective. Alisara's endgame involves breaking Arthur, binding him to her will. The 2-year mark is the point at which she believes her control over her new divinity will be absolute, making his capture inevitable. The air thickened. Breaking me, I thought, binding me, just like she always wanted. Only now she thinks she has the power to make it stick. A cold fury, distinct from the heat of battle, settled in my chest. Rachel tapped a command onto her slate, bringing up a complex energy schematic that floated above the table. Isolde's assessment aligns with our analysis, she stated, her voice crisp and professional. Alisara isn't just stronger. She's operating on a different conceptual level. The fragment of lust divinity allows her to subtly influence probability, to make reality want to conform to her desires. It's not something we can counter with raw power alone. Standard radiant-level techniques are fundamentally mismatched against this type of narrative control. Furthermore, Reka interjected, her tone clipped, the cult now fields a significant number of newly elevated radiant rankers, at least 30 confirmed, likely more. Their power is unstable, highly destructive, and they fight with suicidal fanaticism based on intercepted communications. They act as extensions of Alisara's will. Cecilia leaned forward, her regal composure absolute, but her eyes hard as ruby chips. The Empire is mobilizing counterintelligence assets, she declared, her voice ringing with quiet authority. We are tracking cult cells and disrupting their supply lines where possible. However, a full military confrontation is untenable. It would ignite a global shadow war with civilian losses we cannot countenance, and it would ultimately be futile. We cannot strike the head of the snake. She looked directly at me, the weight of her responsibility clear in her gaze. Engaging Alisara now, even with our combined strength, would be catastrophic. We require time. Time we might not have if Isolde is right about her preparing something larger, I thought grimly. Cecilia speaks the truth, Alice stated from her position by the window. Her voice, though soft, drew every eye. You have all achieved remarkable power, but you remain individuals. Forging separate blades, however sharp, will not fell a god. You must become a single weapon, perfectly balanced, each part supporting the whole. That requires more than strength. It requires harmony, synchronization, a depth of understanding that can only be forged in shared fire. Luna nodded, her golden light seeming to warm the room slightly. The 2-year clock is not a countdown to our doom, she said, her voice calm and resonant. It is an opportunity, a crucible granted by circumstance. We must embrace this time not with fear, but with purpose. We withdraw from the world's distractions, and we dedicate ourselves wholly to the climb. Lucifer finally pushed himself off the wall, a charismatic energy flowing from him, chasing away some of the room's oppressive weight. Enough grim pronouncements, he declared, his voice warm and full of confidence. Luna's right. Sitting around waiting for the sky to fall isn't our style. And rushing in half-cocked is just stupid. So we train. Harder than ever before. He grinned, a flash of heroic certainty. We turn this estate into the toughest training camp in history. We push each other past every limit we thought we had. He met my gaze, his expression turning serious, earnest. You won't face her alone, Arthur. Not now, not ever. We stand together. I swear on my name, when that clock runs out, I'll be strong enough to fight right beside you, shoulder to shoulder. His words resonated deeply. He's the only one close, I acknowledged internally. The only one who truly feels the weight of this peak. But he can't be the only one. My thoughts strayed, a silent hope cast out to the wider world. Ciola, Ren, Jean, Callie, Ian, Clara, wherever you are, keep climbing. Earth needs all its geniuses, all its strength, for what comes after this. We all will stand with you, Seraphina stated, her voice ringing with the unyielding certainty of winter stone. The nods around the table were immediate, resolute. Rachel, Reka, Rose, Cecilia, Luna. Their faces were masks of determination. Then the plan is set, I said, my voice cutting through the last vestiges of doubt. We reduce our responsibilities to the bare minimum. For the next 2 years, this estate becomes our world. Our sole focus is training, synchronization, and pushing beyond the limits of the radiant ranks. My family provides the sanctuary and resources, Alastair confirmed immediately. Consider the Creighton estate yours. The Empire provides the shield, Cecilia declared, already formulating the necessary decrees. I will handle the political theater. My primary duty, however, will be here, training alongside you. My place is here as well, Rose added quietly but firmly. Strength needs roots. I will train, and I will ensure we do not lose ourselves in the climb. Isolde will continue her surveillance, Alastair concluded, glancing briefly at his wife. She is our sentinel. A heavy silence fell, the weight of their collective decision settling over the room. 2 years. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. But the path was chosen. The crucible awaited. The council concluded not with a bang, but with the quiet, determined scrape of chairs against the floor. A plan had been forged in the grim reality of our situation, and now came the infinitely harder task of executing it. The air in the conference room thinned as my family dispersed, each a whirlwind of purpose. Alastair and Rachel were already in a low, intense conversation, their hands gesturing over a holographic schematic of the estate's training facilities. Cecilia was a blur of regal efficiency, stepping into a side chamber to begin the monumental task of weaving a political shield around us, her voice a crisp, commanding presence even through the thick glass. Seraphina and Reka shared a single, sharp nod and moved off together, the silent understanding of swordswomen on a shared path needing no words. I, however, remained rooted to my spot. The strategic and logistical challenges of the next 2 years were immense, but they were not the heaviest weight on my mind. My gaze drifted from the focused intensity of my fiancés to the empty hallway, and my thoughts went to one person. Stella. How do you explain to a 13-year-old that her world is about to shrink? How do you tell a child who has already lost so much that her father and her mothers have to step away, even if they aren't truly leaving? The thought was a cold, heavy stone in my gut. This conversation would be harder than facing any demon lord. I left the conference room's sterile tension behind and walked toward the living quarters, the estate's ambient hum a stark contrast to the silence in my own head. I found her where I knew she would be, in the heart of her self-proclaimed kingdom. The living room had been transformed into a vibrant, chaotic workshop. Schematics for a device I only vaguely understood were spread across the floor, held down by textbooks and stray tools. Stella herself was lying on her stomach in the middle of it all, hoodie sleeves pushed up to her elbows, brow furrowed in concentration as she scribbled a line of tensor calculus in the margin of a blueprint. The sheer, unadulterated focus she possessed was a marvel. It was a world of her own making, a universe governed by the elegant, unyielding laws of mathematics and physics. For a moment, I just watched her, a fierce, protective love washing over me. This was why we were doing this, to protect this small, brilliant world of hers from the encroaching darkness. She must have felt my presence. Without looking up, she said, "Daddy, if you're going to stand there and look tragically noble, could you at least do it a little to the left? You're casting a shadow on my heat dissipation array." The tension in my chest eased, replaced by a familiar warmth. I moved to the left and knelt down beside her on the floor, entering her world of paper and potential. "What am I looking at?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "It's a Manaless kinetic driver," she explained, her pencil tapping an intricate spiral on the page. "The problem with converting raw kinetic energy is the initial power spike. Most frameworks can't handle it, so they bleed off 80% of the potential energy as waste heat." She pointed to her new calculation. "But what if, instead of resisting the spike, you redirect it into a recursive loop that precharges the primary capacitor? You turn the problem into the solution." She's not just smart, I thought, a wave of pride so strong it almost made me dizzy. She thinks around corners I didn't even know existed. "That's brilliant, Stell," I said, and meant it. She finally looked up, her dark eyes bright with the pleasure of a shared idea. "I know, right?" Then her expression shifted, her perceptive gaze taking in the lingering tension around my eyes, the weight I couldn't quite shake. "The meeting is over." "It is," I said. "Is it a bad plan or a hard plan?" she asked, her voice quiet. It was her way of asking if we were desperate or determined. "A hard plan," I replied. "A very hard one. And it's going to change some things. For a while." She put her pencil down, giving me her full, undivided attention. The genius inventor was gone, replaced by my daughter. "Can we talk about it outside?" I asked, gesturing toward the balcony. "I need some air." She nodded, untangling herself from her web of schematics and following me. The balcony was cool, the late afternoon breeze carrying the faint, clean scent of the city. We stood by the railing, looking out over the endless river of hovercars and the glittering spires of Avalon. I took a breath. "Just be honest," I told myself. "She deserves that much." "Stell," I began, my voice steady. "You know there are bad people in the world, people like Alisara, and we have a responsibility to be strong enough to stop them." "I know," she said, her small hand finding mine and squeezing it. "Well, right now we're not strong enough," I admitted, the words tasting like failure. "So, for the next 2 years, me and your moms, all of us, we have to focus on one thing and one thing only: training. We're going to be pushing ourselves harder than we ever have before. It's going to be all-consuming." I finally looked down at her. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable as she processed the information. "So you're leaving?" she asked, her voice very small. "No," I said instantly, my heart aching. "No, never. We're not leaving the estate. We'll be right here. But I won't be able to spend as much time with you as I do now. The training, it's going to take almost everything. I'll be here, but I'll also be away. Does that make sense?" She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the reordering of her world based on this new, unwelcome data. "Will it be less than before?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. The simple, direct question was a knife to the gut. I couldn't lie to her. "Yes, Stell," I said, my own voice rough. "It will be less. I promise you I will make time. I will come see you every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. We'll still have our project days, and I will be there for every single emergency, math-related or otherwise. But it won't be the same as it is now. And I am so sorry for that." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes weren't filled with tears, but with a fierce, profound understanding that was far beyond her 13 years. She reached up with her free hand and placed it on my cheek. "It's okay, Daddy," she said softly. "You have to go be a hero. I get it. Just promise me you'll all come back." I promise, I whispered, pulling her into a hug, burying my face in her hair. She held on tight, a small, solid anchor in a world that was threatening to pull me away. This is the cost, I thought, the single quote, a sharp, painful truth. This is the price of keeping her safe. We stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Later that evening, after tucking a very determined but sleepy Stella into bed, I retreated to my study. The emotional weight of the day had been immense, but there was one last logistical thread to tie off. I initiated a secure call. A moment later, Elias's calm, professional face appeared on the holographic display. "Grandmaster," he greeted, his tone crisp. "Elias," I said, getting straight to the point. "Effective immediately, I am delegating full operational authority of the guild to you." He didn't so much as blink. "Understood, sir." "For how long?" 2 years, I replied. "I will be in a period of intensive, sequestered training and will be completely unavailable for day-to-day operations. You have my full proxy. All decisions are yours." "And in the event of a level 5 or higher emergent threat?" he asked, his mind already working through the protocols. "Contact me only if it is a threat that you, Jean, and Callie, with the full backing of the Empire, cannot contain." "And Elias," I added, my voice softening slightly, "I mean a true emergency, something that threatens the stability of the continent." "Understood, sir," he said, his expression unwavering. "I will manage things. The guild will be here when you return." His absolute, unquestioning competence was a relief. He was the best secretary in the world, a man who could manage a small nation with a data slate and a cup of coffee. "The guild is in good hands." "Thank you, Elias," I said, and meant it. "It is my duty, Grandmaster," he replied, and then, with a flicker of something more personal in his eyes, "Stay safe, sir." "I'll do my best," I said, and ended the call. The display went dark, plunging the study into silence. The final piece was in place. My public life was on hold. My family was prepared. My daughter understood. I looked out the window at the dark, sleeping city. The last of my excuses were gone. Dawn over Avalon arrived not as a gentle awakening, but as a silent, internal alarm clock ringing in the souls of 8 individuals. The penthouse, usually alive with the cheerful chaos of Stella's morning projects and the comforting aroma of Reika's precisely brewed coffee, was hushed. A profound, almost solemn quiet had settled over the luxurious space, the calm before a self-imposed storm. I stood on the balcony, the pre-dawn air a sharp, clean bite against my skin. Below, the city was a scattering of sleeping lights under a sky just beginning to bleed from black to bruised violet. The 2-year clock had officially started ticking. The weight of that decision, made in the stark clarity of the Creighton conference room, felt heavier now in the quiet solitude of morning. There was no more planning, no more debating, only the immense, daunting reality of the climb ahead. Just start, I told myself, the single quote, a sharp, internal command, cutting through the low hum of anxiety. One breath, one step, then the next. One by one, they emerged, not summoned, but drawn by the same internal clock. Not in soft sleep clothes or casual wear, but in the stark, functional gray training gear Alastair had provided. The fabric felt cool and unfamiliar against the skin, a uniform for a war fought not against an external enemy, but against their own limitations. Silence reigned. Breakfast, laid out with silent efficiency by the estate staff, was fuel, not comfort, nutrient paste, dense energy bars, electrolyte solution. We ate standing, or perched on the edges of furniture, lost in our own thoughts, the air thick with unspoken resolve. Eyes met, acknowledging the shared burden, the shared purpose. Rachel's usual warmth was banked down into a focused, analytical intensity. Serafina was a pillar of glacial calm, her recent emergence from the Frostheart cavern having settled into a profound, unshakable stillness. Cecilia's regal posture had transformed into the alert readiness of a field commander surveying the battlefield before the first shot. Reika's hands rested lightly at her sides, perfectly still, her discipline absolute. Rose's gentle aura was now underpinned by a fierce, quiet determination. Her connection to life focused inward, preparing for the strain. Luna's golden eyes held a distant, calculating quality, as if she were already tracing the infinite, complex lines of causality stretching over the next 2 years. Lucifer offered me a single, sharp nod across the room, his easy grin replaced by the focused intensity of a star about to go nova. We were a family, forged in shared battles and quiet moments. But this morning we were something else. A unit, stripped down, bracing for impact. Alastor entered precisely at the designated hour, his presence that of a warden opening the gates to a training ground that was also a prison. "It is time," he said, his voice devoid of unnecessary inflection. He led us down, deeper than I had ever been, into the subterranean heart of the Creighton estate. Layers of humming security fields and heavy adamantium doors sealed behind us, each resonant thud severing another tie to the world above. The polished corridors gave way to rough-hewn rock, reinforced by glowing lattices of pure energy. The air grew cooler, tasting of deep earth and contained power. The thrum of the estate's massive core resonated through the soles of our boots. We arrived in a cavern of impossible scale, a vast emptiness carved from the bedrock beneath the city. The ceiling vaulted into oppressive darkness, while the floor stretched out, a seamless expanse of dull, impact-absorbing material marked with faint, complex energy grids. The walls weren't stone but shimmering containment fields, pulsing with intricate wardwork that made the air feel thick, resistant, pregnant with potential energy. This wasn't a training room. It was a cage built to hold nascent gods. "Training Ground Omega," Alastor announced into the echoing silence. "Fully shielded, reality-anchored. You may unleash your full power here without reservation. The world outside will remain unaware." He gestured, and 2 colossal figures materialized near the center of the cavern, their arrival accompanied by a shift in atmospheric pressure that made my ears pop. Alice stood with her characteristic unassuming stillness, yet the very air around her seemed to warp slightly, acknowledging her presence. Beside her, Tiamat materialized in her humanoid form, tall, imposing, radiating an ancient, draconic power that felt like banked embers. Alastor stepped back, ceding authority. "Your instructors," Alice addressed Lucifer and me. "Your path requires the mastery of stillness, the foundation upon which divinity rests. Come with me." She turned and led us toward a smaller, secondary chamber off the main cavern, its entrance shimmering like heat haze. Tiamat faced the 6 women, her crimson eyes sweeping over them, assessing, calculating. Her presence was fundamentally different from Alice's, less architect, more ancient predator. "You 6, her voice rumbled, a sound like deep stone shifting, "possess immense, disparate powers. Individually, you are storms. Together, you are currently a natural disaster waiting to happen. Your task is not merely to grow stronger, but to harmonize, to learn to breathe as one fire, to move as one current. Forget finesse. Forget complex techniques. Today, you simply learn to stand together without incinerating each other." She pointed toward the center of the vast cavern floor. "Find your center. Feel the power within yourselves and within each other. Then, begin." There was no specific drill, no formation called out. Just a simple, impossible command: harmonize. Cecilia, Rachel, Seraphina, Rose, Reka, and Luna exchanged uncertain glances. They were used to structured training, defined goals. This was something else entirely. Cecilia, ever the leader, took the initiative, moving toward the center, her aura flaring with controlled imperial fire. Rachel followed, her mind already calculating energy flows and potential feedback loops. Seraphina glided forward, her glacial presence instantly lowering the ambient temperature. Rose stepped hesitantly, life energy blooming around her like a protective shield. Reka moved with a warrior's precise economy, her focus sharp. Luna drifted last, her golden eyes half closed, sensing the chaotic interplay of their unleashed energies. They formed a loose circle, and the air immediately began to crackle. Cecilia's fire grated against Serafina's ice. Rachel's analytical attempts to direct the flow were disrupted by Luna's intuitive shifts. Rose's gentle vitality recoiled from Reika's focused killing intent. It was 6 powerful instruments attempting to tune themselves simultaneously in a hurricane. Sparks flew, literal sparks, violet and gold and crimson and silver, erupting where their auras clashed. The containment field flickered, absorbing the uncontrolled discharges. Tiamat watched, utterly impassive, offering no guidance, simply observing the beautiful, dangerous chaos they created. Meanwhile, Alice led Lucifer and me into the secondary chamber. It was stark white, utterly featureless, the silence absolute. Felt like stepping outside of time. "Your challenge is different," Alice said, her voice quiet but resonant in the unnerving stillness. "You stand at the peak. The next step is not about acquiring more power. It is about fundamentally changing your relationship to power. Divinity is effortless equilibrium. You must unlearn the habit of effort." She held up her hands. In each palm, a perfect sphere of pure white light bloomed, stable, warm, silent one. Your power fights you because you command it from the outside. You must invite it in. Become the vessel, not the wielder. Your task: replicate this sphere. Hold it, not with force, with acceptance. Find the quiet lake within the storm. Lucifer, humbled by the memory of our previous failure at this simple task, approached it with grim determination. He extended his hand, sweat already beading on his brow. The sphere that formed flickered violently between light and shadow, spitting chaotic energy before imploding with a silent pop too. He swore under his breath. I took a deep breath, trying to recall the feeling of perfect balance, the quiet agreement of sword accord. I reached inward, not commanding, but inviting. I held out my hand. A jagged starburst of silver-gray energy roared into existence, pulsing with barely contained spatial distortions. 3. It felt less like holding light and more like trying to cup lightning. Still fighting it, I realized, frustration a bitter taste. Still trying to make it obey instead of being the obedience. Alice offered no further instruction, simply holding her own perfect spheres as silent examples. The white room became a crucible of internal struggle, the silence amplifying our failures. Outside, in the main cavern, the sounds were different but the theme resonant, the sharp crackle of clashing energies, the low groan of the containment field under strain, the occasional frustrated shout swallowed by the vastness of the space. The first day was not about breakthroughs. It was about confronting the sheer, daunting scale of the mountain we had chosen to climb. It was about understanding, in our bones and in our souls, just how far we still had to fall before we could truly begin to rise. 2 years. The clock had started, and the silence of our failures was deafening. 2 years. 24 months had slipped by under the thin veneer of global peace, a fragile normalcy painstakingly rebuilt in the wake of apocalyptic conflicts. Cities hummed, data flowed across continents, economies churned, and the average citizen walked under skies blessedly free from the immediate terror of divine or demonic intervention. It was a world cautiously looking forward, trying desperately to believe the worst was truly over. Yet, beneath this carefully constructed calm, unseen forces gathered strength. Hidden clocks counted down inexorably, and the true, deferred cost of past battles festered like a hidden wound, awaiting the precise moment to erupt. That moment arrived not with a declaration of war, but with a cascade of synchronized, crippling system failures across the technologically advanced and economically vital Eastern continent. It began as whispers in the global network, secure communication lines servicing the vast territories under the influence of the Mount Hua sect dissolved into impenetrable static. Simultaneously, power grids supplying the sprawling Kagu family industrial zones flickered, overloaded, and died, plunging state-of-the-art automated factories and research facilities into unnerving darkness. Automated defense platforms guarding critical infrastructure nodes, Hyperloop transit nexuses, atmospheric energy collectors vital for regional power, strategic data repositories holding generations of research, blared piercing intrusion alarms reporting overwhelming hostile forces before their signals abruptly flatlined, one after another, in a chillingly coordinated pattern. Within the hour, the horrifying scope of the assault materialized on emergency command displays worldwide. A sea of crimson alerts washed over the eastern continent map, clustering with terrifying precision around key assets belonging to the region's two dominant and historically unshakable powers: the ancient Mount Hua sect and the technologically formidable Kagu family. The Red Chalice cult, largely dismissed by global intelligence agencies as a scattered, disorganized remnant following the presumed defeat of their enigmatic leader Alasara 2 years prior, had resurfaced with shocking force, meticulous planning, and nightmarish numbers. This was not the chaotic lashing out of fanatics. It was a surgical, strategic decapitation strike executed with terrifying efficiency. Thousands of cult operatives, their ranks inexplicably swelled by dozens of newly revealed Radiant-level fanatics radiating unstable, volatile power, struck in perfect synchronicity. They bypassed densely populated civilian centers entirely, their attacks laser-focused on the critical infrastructure underpinning the East's martial and economic dominance. Leyline integrated power stations vital for regional energy stability, Kagu biotech research campuses pioneering next-generation medical technology, fortified Mount Hua training academies housed in deep subterranean bunkers, secure satellite communication uplinks coordinating regional defenses. All were hit with overwhelming simultaneous force. The fragmented reports filtering through overloaded emergency channels painted a picture of brutal modern warfare infused with supernatural horror. Fanatical cultists, their bodies wreathed in chaotic crimson energy that seemed to corrode physical matter, fought with a suicidal disregard for their own lives. Alongside them, moving with speeds that defied visual tracking, were unnaturally swift, pale figures with eyes glowing like malevolent embers of vampires, seamlessly integrated into the cult's assault formations. Their preternatural strength tore through reinforced plasteel walls as if they were paper, their claws shredded military-grade armor, and their speed overwhelmed sophisticated automated point defense systems designed to track hypersonic projectiles. Mount Hua's state-of-the-art defenses, a complex fusion of ancient warding techniques and cutting-edge energy shielding, buckled under the sheer volume of high-energy targets and the attackers' willingness to sacrifice waves of shock troops to breach defenses. Kagu family security forces, elite corporate soldiers renowned for their tactical discipline, advanced weaponry, and urban combat expertise, found themselves locked in desperate, close-quarters battles within their own gleaming headquarters, facing enemies who ignored conventional tactics, shrugged off seemingly lethal plasma burns and kinetic impacts, and deployed potent miasmic agents that choked filtration systems and corroded advanced sensor arrays. Panic rippled through the Eastern Council headquarters. From the heavily fortified main peak, sect leader Mo Zenith and Master Li Zenith, legendary figures whose power had shaped the continent's history, personally coordinated Mount Hua's desperate defense. Their combined strength served as a critical anchor, stabilizing collapsing sectors and repelling initial probes against the core mountain defenses. But reports indicated the sheer scale and multi-pronged nature of the assault were stretching even their vast resources thin, forcing agonizing tactical retreats and the abandonment of outer territories. The Kagu matriarch, a woman accustomed to wielding global economic influence, watched helplessly via encrypted feeds as generations of corporate power and familial legacy crumbled under the relentless onslaught. She deployed the family's legendary Void Vanguard divisions only to receive fragmented reports of disastrous engagements, heavy casualties, and enemies employing uncanny counterstealth measures and tactics that seemed specifically designed to negate their traditional advantages. Global news networks, scrambling to verify the incoming chaos, broadcast fractured, often censored, images, skyscrapers engulfed in unnatural crimson flames, overwhelmed emergency medical teams struggling to treat bizarre, necrotic wounds, chilling glimpses of impossibly fast, pale predators vanishing into smoke-choked urban canyons alongside crimson-clad figures wielding crackling, unstable energy. The questions echoed in terrified online forums and frantic government briefings. Where had this army materialized from? How had they concealed such numbers, such devastating power, even forging an alliance with powerful vampire factions? Was Alasara truly back, leading this apocalyptic resurgence? No confirmed visuals of her surface amidst the chaos, but the cold, calculating precision of the multi-pronged assault, the unified, zealous fury driving the attackers, it bore the unmistakable, chilling imprint of her malevolent will. Then, a new, perplexing signal began to cut through the digital noise, a signal originating from the very heart of the Kagu territories. Anomalous data streams started pouring out of the region surrounding the Kagu corporate headquarters complex, a sprawling, self-contained city of gleaming research towers, administrative blocks, and subterranean labs. Sensor arrays, already overloaded, reported energy fluctuations spiking beyond all measurable limits, accompanied by localized communication blackouts and intense electronic interference that seemed to deliberately obscure the area. Tactical overlays showed entire divisions of Red Chalice forces, including high-level Radiant commanders and figures identified from fragmented intercepts as Elder Vampires leading assault cadres, simply ceasing to register on the battlefield map, not retreating under fire, not being destroyed by confirmed Kagu counteroffensives, vanishing as if cleanly erased from existence. A high-altitude atmospheric probe, diverted on a desperate priority override by a frantic regional commander hoping for any clarification, managed to pierce the electronic chaos blanketing the valley for several crucial, high-resolution imaging passes. The pictures relayed were stark, painting a scene of utter devastation within the Kagu headquarters central plaza, shattered ferroconcrete, overturned vehicles burning with chemical fires, the air thick with smoke and the lingering discharge of exotic energies. Hundreds of Red Chalice operatives swarmed the plaza, their crimson auras casting an unholy light on the ruins. 3 immensely powerful figures commanded the assault, their energy signatures dominating the sensor readings. 2 hulking radiants, their bodies radiating raw, destructive power like barely contained fusion reactors, and a third, an ancient vampire ancestor shrouded in an oppressive aura of necrotic shadow that seemed to drain the very light from the air. And in the absolute epicenter of this swirling maelstrom, standing untouched, radiating an almost impossible aura of serenity amidst the flying debris and uncontrolled energy discharges, was a single young man, Renkagu. He appeared almost exactly as he had 2 years prior, his youthful face calm, impassive, seemingly disconnected from the apocalyptic carnage surrounding him. He wore simple, unadorned training clothes, his hands held loosely, almost casually, at his sides, his stance relaxed. He wasn't projecting the overwhelming energy signatures typical of a high-level Radiant engaged in desperate combat. He seemed almost quiet, a point of profound stillness around which the storm raged and broke. One of the hulking Radiant commanders, encased in jagged, rock-like energy armor that distorted the air around him with sheer gravitational force, let out a bellowing war cry that momentarily silenced the surrounding firefight and charged Ren. His massive fist, larger than Ren's torso, aimed like a meteoric wrecking ball. Ren didn't brace, didn't evade, didn't even seem to tense. He simply took a small, fluid half-step forward, a movement almost too subtle to track, his own open palm meeting the commander's mountain-like fist just before the point of projected impact. There was no earth-shattering collision, no shockwave rippling through the plaza, no concussive roar. The stone armor, the fist itself, the entire arm of the charging Radiant simply ceased to be, dissolving instantly and completely into fine, inert gray dust that dissipated harmlessly on the air currents before the blow could physically land. The commander's own unstoppable momentum carried his now horrifically mutilated body tumbling past Ren, crashing lifelessly into the burning wreckage of a transport vehicle. The ancient vampire ancestor, its eyes burning with centuries of predatory cunning, materialized from the deepest pool of shadows directly behind Ren, claws like obsidian scalpels already slashing for his spine, moving at speeds that warped perception itself. Ren turned, not with the panicked speed of reaction, but with a fluid, inexorable sense of inevitability, his elbow striking the center of the vampire's chest in a movement that seemed almost gentle, almost reluctant. Again, no violent impact, no sound of breaking bone or tearing flesh. The vampire ancestor froze mid-strike, its ancient, cruel features contorting in an expression of utter, terminal disbelief, before its entire form, Centuries of stolen unlife and accumulated necrotic power, unraveled like smoke, dissolving into a cloud of fine gray ash that vanished utterly before it could even begin to settle. The final radiant commander, witnessing his nigh-invincible allies dispatched with an ease that defied all known laws of combat and physics, unleashed his full, desperate power, a blinding, roaring torrent of pure, incandescent destructive energy, a beam powerful enough to core through a battleship, aimed directly at Ren. Ren simply lifted one hand, palm outward, fingers relaxed, as if greeting a gentle breeze. The incandescent beam struck his palm and stopped. It didn't explode, didn't deflect, didn't splash or scatter. It flowed into his hand, swallowed whole by that quiet palm, vanishing without a trace, leaving Ren utterly unharmed. His expression still unchanged, his stance still relaxed. He lowered his hand and, with a motion almost too casual to notice, casually flicked his fingers in the direction of the commander across the ravaged plaza. The radiant abruptly convulsed, his powerful aura collapsing inward, his body folding in on itself as if crushed by an invisible, irresistible pressure originating from within his own being, before imploding silently into nothingness. Silence descended upon the plaza, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the panicked, ragged breathing of the remaining attackers. There had been no flashy techniques recognizable to any known martial art, no overwhelming energy signatures that could be measured or categorized. Just quiet, precise, economical movements of his hands, his elbow, his body. Subtle shifts in stance that seemed to align perfectly with some unseen, fundamental geometry of existence. His actions didn't feel like attacks launched against an enemy. They felt like corrections applied to a flawed equation, like reality itself gently but irrevocably bending to the quiet, undeniable assertion of his will. The effortless finality of it all radiated outwards, a pressure far more profound and terrifying than any overt display of destructive power. It was as if the world itself simply, quietly agreed with the outcome his fists dictated. The remaining Red Chalice forces, fanatics, radiants, vampires, beings fueled by zealotry and bloodlust, faltered. Their coordinated, relentless assault dissolved into a wave of stunned, horrified hesitation. The primal, instinctual fear of encountering something utterly, fundamentally other, something operating on a scale they couldn't even begin to comprehend, shattered their indoctrination and their predatory drive. Renkagu lowered his hands, his expression still serene, almost peaceful, and took one calm, deliberate step forward into their wavering, terrified ranks. Renkagu had now surpassed his ancestor, the first hero, Liam Kagu. 2 years to get stronger. The message arrived like a ghost, bypassing the Kagu family's formidable security networks through channels Ren didn't fully comprehend but implicitly trusted. It came from Arthur Nightingale, the second hero. The full context painted a grim picture. A newly ascended divine threat named Alisara, a desperate alliance formed against impossible odds, and a non-negotiable 2-year countdown to a potentially world-altering confrontation. But the core directive for Ren was stark. Ignore everything else. Focus solely on surpassing your limits. When this time is over, a true war will begin, and we will need every ounce of strength Earth can muster. For Ren, the message wasn't a revelation but an accelerant. He was already on the path. 2 years prior, he was a celebrated prodigy, a mid-radiant whose skill in the Kagu family's grade 6 art, Void Fist, was deemed exceptional. He possessed the rare triple affinity for space, time, and gravity, synergizing perfectly with the Void Fist's principles. His unique gift, the God's Eyes, granted him visual acuity on a conceptual level, allowing him to perceive the hidden structures of reality. Despite this, he felt a barrier. He stood before the gates of transcendence, the threshold separating radiant power from something more fundamental. He hadn't yet achieved the 5th level of Fist Mastery, the state known universally as Fist Unity. The path forward was obscured. Arthur's message provided the necessary clarity and urgency. This was no longer just about personal ambition. It was about planetary readiness. Ren acted decisively. He formally recused himself from his Kagu corporate responsibilities, ignored the summons of the Eastern Council, and sealed himself away in the deepest, most shielded training chambers beneath the Kagu compound, subterranean vaults designed to contain reality-warping forces. For the next 24 months, Renkagu vanished. His world shrank to the dimensions of the training chamber. His focus narrowed to the singular goal of transcendence. His primary tool became his God's eyes. He didn't just practice the void fist forms. He observed them, dissected them, perceived them on a level beyond physical movement. He watched the infinitesimal ripples his own body created in spacetime with every shift, every breath. He analyzed combat data, not just battles, but the fundamental interactions of energy and matter. Using his gift, he slowed his perception to attoseconds, watching how radiant energy interacted with the fabric of reality, noting the friction, the resistance, the subtle inefficiencies inherent even in masterful techniques. He observed his own energy flow, seeing not just the channels, but the near-imperceptible drag imposed by spacetime itself. The Kagu Void Fist taught control through precise internal energy manipulation and leveraging spatial distortions. But Ren realized it treated the universe as a medium to be acted upon. He began to see it differently, as an active participant, an ocean with currents defined by the laws of space, time, and gravity. The shift came through stillness, through observation. He stopped trying to force the Void Fist's principles onto reality. Leveraging his triple affinity, he began to listen to reality, to sense its underlying structure, its preferred pathways. He started to adjust his movements, his energy flow, not to overcome resistance, but to align with the fundamental geometry of spacetime. He learned to subtly warp space not as an attack, but as an invitation for his fist to arrive without resistance. He learned to fractionally alter temporal flow around his target, making his movements appear inevitable, landing before the conscious thought to defend could form. He learned to apply minute gravitational lenses, adding conceptual weight to a light touch or negating an opponent's momentum entirely. His internal power, honed by the Void Fist, found a new expression. It wasn't just unified within him, it resonated in perfect accord with the external universe. This was the key. He achieved the fifth level, Fist Unity, feeling the seamless integration of self and power. But he didn't stop there. Pushing further, guided by his unique perception, he transcended unity itself, reaching a state where his intent and the universe's fundamental laws became one. Fist Accord. With this profound understanding, the gates of transcendence simply ceased to be a barrier. He stepped through, not into a surge of new power, but into a state of deeper quiet, a more fundamental connection to the fabric of existence. He had reached peak radiant rank. His isolation wasn't total blindness. Periodically, Ren directed his God's eyes outward, amplified by Kagu sensory arrays. He monitored the Red Chalice cult. He saw their network expand, their operatives grow bolder. He identified individuals radiating significant power, ascendant rank bishops coordinating operations, more potent immortal rank cardinals leading fanatical legions. He witnessed the disturbing integration of vampires, elusive ascendant vampire elders, formidable immortal vampire ancestors, and finally, several terrifying radiant rank vampire lords whose power signatures pulsed with ancient hunger. They grew significantly, Ren noted, a rare flicker of surprise touching his deep calm. Alisara's influence, or perhaps she unlocked something dormant. But he saw the instability in their power, the reliance on zealotry or stolen life force. His own evolution was different. He hadn't just gained power, he had gained understanding. So, when the cult storm broke over the east, when the Kagu heartland became a battlefield, Ren emerged not as a desperate defender, but as a calm corrective force. He stepped onto the ravaged central plaza of the Kagu headquarters. Before him, the remnants of the cult's elite forces, those who had survived the negation of their leaders, wavered between fanaticism and dawning terror. The nearest fanatics charged, driven by ingrained zeal, crimson energy flaring. Ren moved. To outside observers it was impossible grace, a phantom gliding through chaos. His God's eyes saw the true, intricate dance. Minute adjustments to spacetime allowed him to exist in the conceptual gaps between their attacks. his movements fractionally preceding their completion. His hands flowed in simple, unhurried arcs. Palm brushed a chest. Fingers tapped a temple. The edge of a hand traced a line near a throat. Each contact was light, almost dismissive, yet carried the absolute weight of fist accord. Reality warped subtly around the impact points. Localized gravity fluctuated impossibly. Bodies didn't explode. They simply failed. Systems ceased functioning. They collapsed silently, inert. A coven of vampire elders flickered through the smoke, moving as blurs. Ren's perception painted their trajectories as simple lines. He didn't attack. He adjusted their environment. A focused gravitational pulse sent one spiraling into wreckage. A microdilation of time caused another's lunge to miss wildly. A spatial fold redirected a third's claws harmlessly into the ground. Cultist bishops unleashed coordinated barrages from the ruins. Ren walked through them. His god's eyes read the nature of each spell. Minute gestures, focused intent. He subtly altered the local spacetime geometry. Spells didn't impact. They flowed around him, unraveling harmlessly against the plaza floor behind. Two vampire ancestors attempted a synchronized pincer strike, radiating centuries of predatory power. Ren met them with quiet negation. As one lunged, his fist arrived inevitably, tapping the vampire's wrist. Time stuttered locally. The vampire's own kinetic force overloaded its structure, shattering its arm. As the other swept in, Ren's heel connected with the ground. A gravitational pulse momentarily anchored the ancestor, disrupting its speed just enough for Ren's upward palm strike to the chin, a ripple of spatial distortion extinguishing its unlife. He moved through the remaining forces, untouchable, undeniable. Even the last vampire lords and cultist cardinals found their potent attacks dissolving, their defenses bypassed, their very presence subtly contradicted by his serene movements. They were strong, stronger than anticipated. But against fist accord, against a demigod moving in harmony with the universe, their strength was irrelevant noise. Minutes passed. The plaza fell silent but for the crackle of fires. Hundreds of attackers lay still, dissolved or erased. Ren stood alone, breathing evenly, untouched. He had not fought, he had calibrated. He slowly lowered his hands. Then his head tilted slightly. His god's eyes narrowed, focusing past the immediate devastation, toward the heavily damaged main Kagu research tower. Presence. Dense. Heavy. Wrong. A power signature pulsing with suffocating miasma, resonating on a frequency that scraped against his senses. A discordant echo of the calamities themselves. Ren turned, his calm gaze locking onto the shattered, smoking entrance of the tower. From the oppressive darkness within, a figure began to emerge, radiating an aura that felt like a raw, bleeding tear in the fabric of reality. The silence in the ravaged plaza was heavy, broken only by the mournful groan of stressed metal from the skeletal remains of the Kagu research tower. Renkagu stood motionless amidst the devastation he had wrought, his serene gaze fixed on the shattered entrance. The oppressive presence he had detected moments before intensified, coalescing from a diffuse miasma into a focused point of terrifying power emanating from the darkness within. A figure stepped out, deliberately, into the harsh light filtering through the smoke-choked air. He was human, unremarkable in stature, dressed in the high-collared, deep crimson robes favored by the Red Chalice cult's upper echelons. What set him apart was the sword he carried, a long, wickedly curved blade that seemed forged from solidified shadow, radiating waves of palpable miasma, and the aura that clung to him like a shroud. It was a discordant, nauseating blend. Pure, refined mana flowed through him in potent channels, the signature of a high-level cultivator, perhaps even touching the radiant ranks. But interwoven with it, corrupting it, amplifying it in unnatural ways, was a thick, cloying miasma, the chaotic energy of the abyss. The two forces churned within him, creating a vortex of power that felt fundamentally unstable, yet terrifyingly strong. This was not the raw, uncontrolled fanaticism of the cultists Ren had just dispatched. This was controlled chaos, honed technique infused with abyssal power. It resonated at a level Ren recognized with chilling certainty: calamity. This man wielded power comparable to the entities that had nearly shattered the world. The Deputy Pope, Ren deduced, his god's eyes analyzing the intricate, blasphemous energy patterns. One of Alisara's inner circle, elevated through forbidden means. The Deputy Pope surveyed the scene, the hundreds of inert bodies, the dissolved remains of radiant commanders and elder vampires, and his expression, initially one of cold arrogance, shifted to disbelief, then narrowed into focused, murderous rage. His gaze locked onto Ren. "You," the Deputy Pope hissed, his voice grating, layered with both human intonation and a deeper, sibilant echo. "A Kagu whelp? How is this possible? Liam himself could not have achieved such." He trailed off, unable to reconcile the effortless destruction with the unassuming young man before him. Ren remained silent, his posture relaxed, his hands still held loosely at his sides. His god's eyes were already dissecting his opponent, mapping the flow of mana and miasma, identifying the structural weaknesses in his technique, the temporal tells in his stance, the subtle gravitational imbalances in his posture. He saw not a calamity-level threat, but a flawed system operating inefficiently. "No matter," the Deputy Pope spat, raising his shadow blade. Miasma coiled around the steel like hungry serpents, while crimson mana flared along its edge. "You possess power beyond your station. It will belong to the Red Chalice. To Alisara." He lunged. Unlike the berserk charges of the fanatics, his movement was blindingly fast, technically perfect swordsmanship amplified by both energies. The shadow blade didn't just cut through the air. It seemed to unwrite the space it passed through, leaving trails of corrosive miasma and flickering spatial distortions. It was a strike designed not just to kill, but to annihilate body and soul. Ren didn't move to intercept. He simply shifted his weight, a subtle pivot on the ball of his foot. The Deputy Pope's blade, aimed precisely at Ren's heart, passed harmlessly through the space where he had been a microsecond before. It wasn't merely speed. Ren's god's eyes had perceived the exact initiation of the thrust, and a minute, localized time dilation around himself allowed his physical response to arrive concurrently with the attack's conception, making evasion seem like a passive state rather than an active motion. The Deputy Pope, carried forward by his own momentum, reacted instantly, twisting his body into a devastating follow-up slash. Miasma erupted from the blade, forming shadowy tendrils that lashed out, seeking to bind Ren in place. Simultaneously, the mana edge flared, threatening to sever him in two. Ren met the complex attack with simplicity. As the miasmic tendrils reached for him, he extended one hand, fingers spread. He didn't project a shield. He subtly manipulated the local gravitational field, creating microwells of intense gravity around each tendril. They weren't blocked. They were simply diverted, pulled off course by forces they weren't designed to resist, tangling harmlessly in on themselves. As the crimson-edged blade swept towards him, Ren took another small step, not backwards, but sideways in a way that subtly warped space. The blade passed through the air, inches from his chest, yet it felt miles away, the distance fundamentally altered by Ren's quiet adjustment of the spatial geometry. Frustration flashed across the Deputy Pope's face. He unleashed a furious combination, sword moving in a blur, each strike infused with both corrupting miasma and explosive mana. He became a whirlwind of destructive energy, turning the air around Ren into a chaotic storm of shadow cuts and crimson explosions. Ren moved within the storm like a leaf on a calm pond. His god's eyes saw not chaos, but a predictable pattern of attacks, each telegraphed milliseconds in advance by the subtle shifts in the Deputy Pope's energy and posture. His movements were minimal, fluid, effortless. A slight turn of the wrist here, a fractional shift in weight there. He didn't block, he redirected. He didn't dodge. He simply wasn't where the attack landed. He used fist accord not as a weapon, but as a principle of non-interference, allowing the Deputy Pope's own uncontrolled power to expend itself harmlessly against the unyielding laws of physics that Ren subtly manipulated. "He relies on overwhelming force," Ren observed dispassionately. "His technique is sharp but brittle. The fusion of mana and miasma grants him immense power, but creates internal dissonances he constantly struggles to control. He fights not just me, but himself. The deputy pope roared, sensing his attacks were having no effect. He channeled more power, the miasma around him thickening, darkening, coalescing into monstrous, shifting shapes that lunged at Ren alongside his blade. The mana flared brighter, hotter, threatening to incinerate the very air. Ren decided the observation phase was over. As a shadowy claw formed of pure miasma lunged for his face, Ren didn't evade. His fist moved, seemingly slowly, yet arriving with impossible speed, tapping the center of the claw. There was no impact, only a quiet thump. Reality itself, at the point of contact, seemed to momentarily forget the rules governing miasmic constructs. The claw dissolved instantly, not violently, but simply ceasing to be. Simultaneously, as the deputy pope's blade swept in again, Ren stepped inside the arc, his movement defying conventional physics. His other hand chopped down, not on the blade, but on the deputy pope's wrist. Again, the contact was light, almost dismissive, but a pulse of focused gravitational force, infinitesimally small but infinitely dense, traveled through the point of contact. The deputy pope cried out as the bones in his wrist and forearm instantly turned to powder, his grip failing, the shadow blade clattering uselessly onto the ravaged plaza floor. Pain and disbelief warred on the deputy pope's face. He stumbled back, clutching his ruined arm, his aura flickering wildly as he struggled to comprehend the effortless negation of his calamity-level power. How? He stammered, fear finally cracking his fanatical resolve. What are you? Ren didn't answer. He took a calm step forward, closing the distance. He had seen enough. The deputy pope was powerful, yes, a genuine calamity-level threat fueled by forbidden fusion. But he was flawed, unstable, relying on borrowed power he didn't truly understand. Measured against the quiet, fundamental truth of fist accord, he was simply insufficient. Ren raised his hand, palm open, preparing to deliver the final, corrective touch. Not a blow fueled by anger or force, but a simple application of principle, an adjustment that would unravel the chaotic knot of mana and miasma holding the deputy pope together, returning him to equilibrium, to silence. His god's eyes saw the inevitable path, the subtle frequencies required, the precise point of application. His fist began its descent, moving not fast, but with the undeniable certainty of a concluding thought. The air itself seemed to still, acknowledging the finality of the moment. Then, something impossible happened. A single, impossibly thin thread, the color of dried blood, materialized from nowhere. It snaked through the air with unnatural speed and wrapped itself around Ren's descending wrist. It wasn't energy. It wasn't physical matter in any conventional sense. Felt like solidified intent, ancient, cold, impossibly strong. Ren's fist, carrying the conceptual weight capable of unmaking a calamity, stopped dead, inches from the deputy pope's chest, held fast by that single, inexplicable crimson thread. The crimson thread pulsed, once, against Renkagu's wrist. It was impossibly thin, yet it held his fist immobile, effortlessly negating the conceptual weight of fist accord that moments before had unmade radiant commanders and vampire ancestors. His strike, poised to unravel the deputy pope, simply stopped, suspended inches from its target by this single, inexplicable tether. Ren's god's eyes focused instantly, attempting to dissect the nature of the thread. It wasn't energy in any form he recognized, not mana, not miasma, not even the complex energies wielded by divine beasts. It wasn't purely physical matter, though it possessed a tensile strength that defied any known material science. Felt like solidified will, a narrative imposed upon reality, a single, absolute statement. You stop here. The concept was chillingly simple, yet terrifyingly potent. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying perfume that hadn't been present moments before, roses and something metallic, like spilled blood. A pressure descended upon the ravaged plaza, immense and suffocating, far exceeding the chaotic miasma the deputy pope had radiated. It was the weight of a true divine presence, settling over the Kagu heartland like a shroud. The remaining fires flickered and dimmed under its influence. The very stones seemed to groan. The deputy pope, still reeling from the negation of his power and the shattering of his arm, looked up, his fear momentarily replaced by ecstatic, fanatical worship. Alisara, he breathed, bowing his head despite his injuries. Ren didn't need the confirmation. He felt her, not necessarily her physical body, but her attention, her power, focused now entirely on him through that single crimson thread. It was like feeling the gaze of a star, distant yet possessing incomprehensible gravity. This power, Ren thought, his own profound calm beginning to fray at the edges. It's not just stronger, it's different, operating on a level where my accord has no purchase, like trying to punch water. He focused his intent, channeling the principles of fist accord not as an attack but as a release. He subtly manipulated space-time around his wrist, attempting to create a microfold, a momentary disconnection from the thread's anchor point. The thread remained utterly unaffected. He tried altering the local gravitational constant, attempting to make his own fist possess infinite inertia. The thread held, reality itself seemingly prioritizing Alisara's command over fundamental physics. He even tried dilating time around the thread itself, attempting to stretch its moment of existence into infinity, rendering it brittle. It simply persisted, timeless, absolute. His techniques, capable of unmaking calamity-level threats, were utterly useless against this singular expression of divine will. It wasn't a contest of strength. It was a conflict of conceptual authority, and hers vastly outweighed his own. A voice echoed, not in the air, but directly within Ren's mind. It was musical, seductive, laced with amusement and a chilling undercurrent. Clever boy, you reached higher than I anticipated. Peak radiant, touching the hem of godhood? Adorable. The pressure intensified. Ren felt his bones creak, his own internal energy struggling against the sheer weight of her attention. It was like being pinned beneath an entire ocean. He could breathe, but only just. Did you truly think you could stand against me? Against control itself? Everything yields to me, little Kagu. Even your precious stillness. Then the attack came. Not a blast of energy, not a physical strike, but an eruption of intent. From the point where the first thread held him, dozens, then hundreds more burst into existence. They weren't summoned. They simply were, extruding from the initial anchor point like fractal impossibilities. They snaked around his arms, his legs, his torso, binding him instantly, completely. Each thread carried that same absolute conceptual weight. Restrained, pouring every ounce of his peak radiant power, every subtle manipulation of space, time, and gravity he commanded, into resisting. It was futile. The threads constricted, not crushing his body, but negating his power, silencing his accord, binding his very connection to the fundamental forces he wielded. He felt like a finely tuned instrument suddenly wrapped in lead, his music silenced. How? The thought echoed in his rapidly constricting world. How can a single being possess such overwhelming, absolute authority over reality itself? This gap, it's not a gap, it's an abyss. The difference between peak radiant and true divine wasn't incremental. It was fundamental. He had climbed a mountain only to find himself at the base of an infinite cliff face. A flicker of true despair, cold and unfamiliar, touched his core. The oppressive weight of Alisara's presence wasn't confined to the plaza. Across the Kagu heartland, the tide of battle, which had begun to turn with Ren's intervention, abruptly froze. Kagu security forces, moments before pushing back cultist remnants, suddenly felt a crushing hopelessness descend upon them. Their advanced weaponry flickered, energy levels dropping inexplicably. Wards protecting command bunkers sputtered, their intricate matrices disrupted by the sheer conceptual pressure radiating from the distant plaza. Hope, painstakingly rekindled by Ren's stand, guttered and died under the suffocating blanket of divine despair. Even the fanatical cultists paused, their crimson auras dimming slightly as they basked in the overwhelming presence of their goddess. Back in the plaza, Run was completely immobilized, cocooned in a cage of crimson threads that seemed to absorb light itself. He could barely move, barely breathe. The deputy pope watched, his face alight with vindictive triumph. Alisara's voice echoed in Ren's mind again, softer now, almost crooning. There now, see how easy it is? No more struggle, no more pointless resistance. Soon you will understand. The threads tightened further. Ren felt his consciousness dimming, his connection to his own power fraying under the absolute negation. One particularly thick thread snaked towards his neck, its intent clear, absolute. Capture wasn't the immediate goal. It was subjugation, the breaking of his will before the binding began. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. He had reached heights few had ever dreamed of, surpassed a legendary ancestor. And it wasn't enough. Not even close. Suddenly, two streaks of impossible speed, impossibly gray, tore through the oppressive atmosphere. They didn't announce themselves with thunder or light, but with a profound, instantaneous correction of the surrounding reality. They moved not like projectiles, but like lines drawn by a cosmic editor, cutting through Alisara's imposed narrative. One streak, sharp and clean as newly forged steel, carrying an echo of quiet winter, intersected the crimson thread aimed at Ren's neck. The thread, conceptually absolute moments before, simply parted, dissolving into harmless motes. The other streak, warmer, carrying the weight of mountains and the hum of deep harmony, flowed around the cocoon binding Ren. It didn't attack the threads. It addressed the concept of binding itself. With a soundless ripple, the hundreds of crimson threads lost their cohesion, their absolute authority negated by a different, equally fundamental truth. They unwound, loosened, and dissipated like smoke in a strong wind. Ren gasped, air flooding back into his lungs, his power surging back as the suppression lifted. He stumbled slightly, caught off balance by the sudden release. He looked up. Hovering just above the plaza floor, side by side, were two figures, bathed in the soft, steady glow of their own immense power. One radiated a clean, sharp cold, twin crowns of white and shadow flickering around his head like captured stars. The other pulsed with a deeper, quieter resonance, an aura of profound stillness and undeniable presence that seemed to make the very ground beneath him more solid, more real. Lucifer Windward and Arthur Nightingale had arrived. Reality snapped back with nauseating force. The absolute, suffocating negation imposed by the crimson threads vanished as if erased, severed by two clean lines of gray correction that sliced through Alisara's imposed narrative. Renkagu gasped, stumbling forward as Fisticord flooded back into his limbs, the sudden restoration of his own profound connection to spacetime almost painful after the utter void of her suppression. He looked up, steadying himself against a wave of disorientation, his god's eyes immediately locking onto the two figures who had materialized just inches above the ravaged Kagu Plaza. Lucifer Windward blazed, a defiant point of light and shadow against the oppressive divine presence that still weighed down the air like a physical shroud. His twin crowns pulsed with furious energy, actively pushing back, carving out a small bubble of tangible reality through sheer, indomitable will. Beside him stood Arthur Nightingale. He was quieter, yet his presence felt infinitely denser, more fundamental. His peak radiant power was not a visible flare. It was a profound stillness, a localized assertion of objective truth that subtly counteracted the cloying perfume and unnatural gravity dominating the area. Gray power emanated from him, not as an attack or shield, but as an undeniable, unshakable fact, forcing reality in his immediate vicinity to adhere to its proper, unbent rules. Lucifer shot Ren a tight, strained grin, sweat beading visibly on his brow despite the unnatural chill permeating the plaza. "Heard you ordered takeout? Deliveries here." Arthur ignored the attempt at levity. His gaze, sharp and impossibly analytical, swept across the plaza, Ren's weakened state. The inert form of the deputy pope, the lingering, corrosive traces of Alisara's conceptual threads. His focus then shifted, not upward, but conceptually outward, towards the unseen, distant source of the overwhelming divine presence. Alisara, he stated, his voice calm, level, yet resonating with an authority that subtly challenged her dominance over the space, carving out a small pocket of normalcy. This ends now. A voice echoed directly within their minds, bypassing the need for physical sound. It was achingly musical, laced with a familiar, chilling amusement, but the dominant note was one of profound, almost weary disappointment. It ignored Lucifer and Ren completely, focusing its entire, crushing weight solely, intensely on Arthur. Arthur, how predictable. You arrive precisely when the initial demonstration concludes. There was a distinct pause, a sense of her vast, divine attention sweeping over him, assessing, measuring his state, his power. And after 2 full years, is this truly all? Peak radiant? Still? The mental voice seemed to sigh, a sound like silk tearing slowly across galaxies, conveying utter boredom mixed with a faint, almost pitying surprise. How profoundly adequate. The dismissal was absolute, colder than any overt threat. There was no rage, no fear of his arrival, only the crushing weight of unmet expectations. Her obsession was not merely about possession. It sought a perceived equal, a worthy counterpart to her own self-proclaimed divine status. Arthur, in his current peak radiant state, apparently failed to meet that impossible standard, failing to reach divinity himself. The divine pressure, previously a passive weight dominating the area, now focused into an active, targeted force, slamming down like the gravity of a collapsing star, aimed entirely at Arthur and Lucifer. It was not raw energy. It was conceptual denial, the universe itself seemingly agreeing with her assertion of superiority, prioritizing her will. Ran, outside the direct beam of her focus but still caught in the overwhelming periphery, felt his knees threaten to buckle, the ambient pressure alone making it difficult to even draw breath. Lucifer grit his teeth, celestial light and abyssal shadow erupting from him in equal, furious measure, forging a desperate, shimmering shield against the crushing weight. Ren could see the nearly invisible barrier warping under the strain, microfractures forming and sealing almost instantly as Lucifer poured his own peak radiant essence into maintaining their small bubble of defiance. He was holding, but the effort was monumental, sweat carving clean tracks through the grime on his face. Arthur met the pressure differently. He did not project a visible shield. His gray power deepened, expanded slightly, becoming a zone of quiet, absolute negation. He was not fighting her pressure head-on. He was asserting a different, more fundamental truth within his immediate space. Here your weight does not apply. Ren, observing with his god's eyes, perceived the immense, complex calculations happening beneath Arthur's calm exterior as he analyzed the structure of Alisara's control, mapping the flow of her conceptual influence. Alisara's mental voice dripped with condescension, still focused entirely on Arthur, still relying on that quaint little bubble, that passive negation, still hiding behind denial instead of reaching for true command, true control. I reshaped my very being, Arthur. I consumed the essence of lust, learned to weave fantasy into the very fabric of existence, touched the face of true godhood. And you merely polished the tools you were given. I offered you a challenge, a reason to ignite, to truly become divine. Instead, you simply practiced. I expected a rival worthy of eternity. I find only potential squandered. Her disappointment felt like a physical blow, striking not just at his power, but at his very resolve. Is she right? Arthur thought, the single quote a cold flicker of doubt quickly buried under layers of focused analysis. Is peak radiant truly the ceiling against this kind of conceptual authority? Then, she demonstrated the gulf between them with contemptuous ease. Reality flickered, not just in their minds, but the physical space around Arthur seemed to stutter, momentarily overwritten. The ruined plaza overlaid with a scene of grotesque opulence, Arthur himself, clad in archaic finery, kneeling unwillingly before a shadowy throne, chains not of metal but of woven desire binding his limbs. It was her fantasy control, born of Lysantra's stolen power, a fleeting projection of her ultimate desire imposed onto his immediate reality. The overlay lasted only a fraction of a second before shattering against the unwavering assertion of Arthur's gray negation. He hadn't even seemed to react outwardly, his power simply rejecting the imposed narrative without conscious effort. But the effortlessness of it was terrifying. She hadn't launched a focused mental assault. She had merely imagined him subjugated, and reality had briefly complied. Enough! Lucifer roared, channeling his fury and his own peak radiant power into a single, focused beam, pure white celestial light wrapped in tendrils of annihilating abyssal shadow, launched like a spear not at Alisara's unseen location, but at the conceptual anchor point through which her power flowed into the plaza. It was a sophisticated attack, aimed at disrupting the connection itself, a desperate attempt to sever her control at the source. The beam screamed across the sky, powerful enough to erase a small city. It never reached its implied target. Halfway there, it simply stopped, frozen solid in the air as if embedded in invisible amber. Then, with an almost bored, contemptuous twist of Alisara's distant will, the beam reversed direction, folding back on itself, gathering impossible speed as it hurtled back towards Lucifer. Lucifer cursed, throwing up another, denser shield of interwoven light and shadow just in time. The impact was cataclysmic, a contained detonation of conflicting peak radiant energies. He was thrown backward violently, skidding across the broken ferroconcrete for dozens of meters, his shield shattering into a billion fading motes. He landed hard but immediately forced himself back to his feet, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his aura flickering erratically but holding defiance burning in his eyes. Simultaneously, Alisara refocused entirely on Arthur, her patience clearly, finally exhausted by his persistent defiance and, perhaps more infuriatingly, his perceived lack of ambition. Her complete control descended not as a subtle pressure or fleeting illusion, but as an absolute environmental lockdown. The gray negation field Arthur maintained warped violently, struggling to hold its shape against the overwhelming assertion. The very space around him thickened, solidified, resisting his every potential movement like hardening diamond. Gravity did not just increase. It became directional, attempting to slam him into the ground from all sides simultaneously. His own lucent harmony, the power that usually made the world subtly agree with his intent, found itself utterly drowned out by a will that simply declared its own truth paramount, absolute and final. "It's too much," Arthur thought, the single quote stark and unavoidable, even as he subtly adjusted his stance, grounding himself through his connection to the planet, minimizing the surface area exposed to her multidirectional pressure. He felt like he was trying to stand steady in the heart of a collapsing star. Peak radiant is a different language. She is not just controlling energy or matter. She is controlling the syntax of reality. Alisara's voice came again, softer now, almost intimate, laced with a predatory tenderness, directed only at Arthur. "Don't you see, my love? The struggle is so unnecessary, so beneath you. Yield. Accept. It will be so much easier, so much more complete. Let me show you what true power feels like. Let me remake you in an image worthy of standing beside me." A single, thicker crimson thread, identical to the ones that had bound Run but pulsing now with a deeper, more possessive energy, materialized directly before Arthur's face. It hovered patiently, invitingly. It was not aimed at binding him physically this time. It felt aimed at his core, his will, his very soul. It was not a leash. It was an offer of absolute subjugation, disguised as union. The final, terrible temptation. Arthur stared at it, the sheer, crushing weight of her divine will pressing in from all sides, threatening to extinguish the small, stubborn flame of his defiance, forcing a choice he wasn't yet strong enough to make. The plaza held its breath, waiting for his answer. The crimson thread pulsed before Arthur, a silent ultimatum woven from divine will and possessive desire. Around him, reality itself seemed warped, held hostage by Alisara's complete control. Gravity pulled from impossible angles, space resisted movement, and the very air felt thick with her suffocating presence. Lucifer, though back on his feet, was clearly strained, his power focused entirely on maintaining his own precarious foothold against the overwhelming pressure. Rinkagu stood tense, his god's eyes wide as he witnessed the sheer conceptual dominance Arthur faced. Knowing his own peak radiant power offered no solution here. This was a battle being fought on a plane beyond raw strength. Arthur met the hovering thread's silent demand. He felt the insidious pull of it, the seductive promise of an end to struggle, the allure of power shared, even if unequally. He saw, reflected in its non-surface, the culmination of Alisara's desire him, broken, remade, kneeling at her side. The image was grotesque, a violation of everything he stood for, everything he fought to protect. He raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, not to grasp the thread, but to meet it. He focused his own power, not into an attack, not into a shield, but into a single, quiet assertion. He channeled his lucent harmony, the principle of objective truth, and touched the tip of the crimson thread with one finger. There was no explosion, no grand clash of energies. Instead, the thread recoiled slightly, as if touched by something fundamentally antithetical to its nature. Harmony, the quiet assertion of what is, grated against the fantasy woven into Alisara's control, the assertion of what she wished to be. For a fraction of a second, the absolute nature of her control wavered, a tiny ripple spreading outwards from the point of contact. It wasn't enough to break free. It wasn't enough to win. But it was enough to answer. It was a quiet, undeniable no. Alisara's mental voice resonated with a fresh wave of irritation, the condescending amusement replaced by genuine annoyance. Still resisting? Still clinging to your pathetic little truths? You think that insignificant spark can defy me? She didn't attack again with threads or environmental pressure. She attacked his mind, his will, directly. The fantasy aspect of her power surged, no longer a fleeting overlay, but a targeted deluge. The ruined plaza dissolved, replaced instantaneously by visions tailored to break him. He saw Stella, older, her face streaked with tears, pleading with him to surrender for her sake. He saw his fiancés, one by one, falling in battle against impossible odds, their last breaths blaming his stubbornness. He saw Mount Hua consumed by shadow, Magnus' grave desecrated. He saw the original Arthur standing before him, shaking his head in disappointment. Each vision was crafted with exquisite cruelty, woven from his deepest fears, his most profound responsibilities. They felt utterly real, imbued with the conceptual weight of her divine will. Doubt gnawed at him, sharp and cold. Was he being selfish? Was his defiance costing the lives of those he loved? No. A different part of him answered, a quiet anchor amidst the storm. It was the echo of soul resonance, the deep, fundamental connection he shared with his family, a truth that resonated beneath the layers of her lies. He felt their presence, not physically, but spiritually. Rachel's fierce intellect, Seraphina's unyielding core, Cecilia's unwavering command, Rose's gentle strength, Rekha's absolute loyalty, Luna's cosmic calm. They were real. They were fighting their own battles. They trusted him. He focused on that truth amplified by harmony. He didn't fight the illusions. He simply acknowledged them as falsehoods. The gray power within him responded, not by attacking, but by passively unwriting the fantasy where it touched his consciousness. The visions flickered, distorted, lost their emotional weight as their conceptual foundations were negated by his assertion of objective reality. He stood steady amidst the psychic storm, his eyes clear, meeting the unseen gaze of the goddess who sought to break him. He offered no defiance, no counterattack, only the quiet, unyielding refusal to accept her narrative. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The mental assault ceased. The crushing environmental pressure vanished. The thick, cloying perfume dissipated. The air in the Kagu Plaza felt suddenly, shockingly thin and cold, the silence deafening after the overwhelming presence. Alisara's mental voice echoed one last time. No longer angry, no longer seductive, just empty, flat, utterly devoid of interest. Still just this. 2 years, and you haven't even learned how to truly desire, let alone command. You are a profound waste of potential, Arthur Nightingale. Perhaps the demon lords will prove more entertaining. And then she was gone. Not defeated, not repelled. She had simply withdrawn her attention, dismissed them entirely, like a bored child discarding a toy that failed to amuse. The sheer, insulting anticlimax of it was almost worse than the battle itself. Arthur, Lucifer, and Rin stood in the ravaged plaza, breathing heavily, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the chilling echo of her final words. They looked at each other, the unspoken understanding passing between them. They had survived, but only because they hadn't been deemed worth destroying. Lucifer opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to curse, perhaps to question. Run took a shaky step forward, his god's eyes scanning the empty sky. Arthur simply stood, processing the encounter, the terrifying gap in power, the unexpected reprieve born from inadequacy. Before any of them could utter a word, the air directly in front of Arthur shimmered. Not with Alisara's crimson malevolence, nor with his own steady gray. This was a faint, neutral golden light, startlingly similar to Luna's own, yet somehow different, older. Slowly, silently, an object materialized from the light, settling gently into existence without disturbing a single mote of dust. It was a letter, crafted from parchment that felt impossibly ancient yet showed no signs of decay or wear. It was sealed with a complex wax crest none of them recognized. A stylized, leafless tree, its roots intertwined with a single, unblinking, lidless eye. Elegant, archaic script adorned the front, penned in ink that seemed to absorb the ambient light, making the letters stand out with stark, absolute clarity. It was addressed, unmistakably, impossibly, directly to him. Arthur Nightingale.